الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين يا رب لك الحمد حتى ترضى اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So I know we're supposed to evacuate at 7:30. So with that in our minds, we have a lot to go over. This is supposed to be a lighter session, to be honest, in its essence. But before we get to the lighter part, it's very important to situate ourselves in a discussion. Every time you are encountering a concept, a field, a faculty, a discipline, a fan, it's very important, first and foremost, to ground yourself in the mabadi of that discussion, which are the foundational principle points, so that we can have a conversation. So when I say something, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Otherwise, what happens, especially when it comes to fiqh, which is not ta'abudan, it's not fiqh of ibadah or something like that. I mean something, and you're hearing something else. Then you go out and said, he said that's fine, or he said his teacher said that's halal, or Mawardi said this is okay, or no, we said this is fine, and I didn't mean that. And that's because we're talking two different languages. So the first thing that's going to happen, inshallah ta'ala, is I'm going to go over certain qawaid or principles. You can write them down, whether you like it. Mac MSA knows well that every time I'm here, it's semi-academic, even if it's a Jummah khutbah. I can't help myself, okay? Actually, it's not about that. It's what we were just, sorry, your name? So what Ali and I were just talking about, is that the fact that you're here, I just blanketly consider you a serious student of knowledge because you chose to be here. This is a conscious, intentional decision, right? And so if you're a student of knowledge, whether you don't have your note-taking devices with you, it's okay. Just take a phone out, go to the Notes app. If there's anything you find beneficial, most of what I'm going to say is actually not from me, right? I am considered as a very skilled thief, okay? Which is, there is a wisdom tradition that the Islamic sciences and also the Western philosophical sciences impinges on, excels on, right? And if you have access to that wisdom tradition, you don't actually have to say anything from your own. It's a cop-out, right? So weak-minded people can sound like they know what they're talking about because they have access to that wisdom tradition, okay? So if you find something beneficial from that tradition, please write it down. If you need me to repeat something, please do so. If something is really important, I'll write it down. And we're going to try and do this until about 7:15 before we get into the, sorry, not 7:15. It was supposed to be 6:15 because it was supposed to be 45 minutes, but we'll go till about 6:50. 6:50, we'll try to cover the mabadi, situate ourselves, and then we can talk about leisure. Okay, then we can talk about actual masail. So from the masail that we're going to talk about are things like, practical stuff, board games, intermixing of genders, sports, extremism in particular aspects of leisurely play, the importance of spending time with young people, the importance of spending time with old people, all of this other discussions, practical things here and there that we need, we'll get to. But for the next 40 minutes, I just need everyone's attention. It will sound like a lecture, but I'm not really lecturing. You can pause. Everyone here has a remote. You can pause, rewind. Can't fast forward, doesn't work. But pause, rewind, slow-mo, whatever you want to do with me, you're good to do so. Just raise your hand. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Want to first start off by saying that there is a qaida. There's a qaida in the religion. And that qaida in the religion is that ad-dunya mal'una. That the dunya and everything related to the dunya is accursed. All that means is that it is distant from the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so this is, you can tie this into the first, you see how I timed it so that the salah people can be with us? Yeah. Okay, so the first thing, the first qaida that you want to write, so we could do principles. I hope this is not too far for the sisters. Okay, so learn important principles, right? So principle number one is that the world in its lowly pursuits. And what does lowly pursuits means? devoid of the divine. Right? The world in its lowly pursuits, which means it's devoid of the divine, is accursed. Right? Mal'un just means distant. It means distant from God's grace. There's any rhetoricians here? Can I ask you a rhetorical question? Do you know why this is divine, but over here it's not? Like it could be God, right? Devoid of God. But over here it's God. Does anyone know why? Anyone study the liberal arts? Anyone went to a grammar school or studied liberal arts in high school or some of your courses? Yeah, I'm asking, so why is it that, because, I told you, I treat you guys as if you're students of knowledge, which means you have to be intentioned in what you're writing and note-taking. Just asking you, it could have been devoid of Allah, it could have been devoid of God. It specifically says devoid of the divine, and then in the next line it says distant from God, instead of saying distant from Allah or anything. Does you know why? Yes?
The word world and lowly and divine considered to be a higher entity, so it couldn't be in
Perhaps, but God is also an elevated entity, right? Yes.
Is it the idea of ta'zim li lafz al-jalal, like the idea of honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name, so you associate the low thing with the divine?
Yeah, very good. So there's this understanding in adab that when you are talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you distant his actual lafz jalal and his mention from anything which is lowly. Right? So it's adaban. It's out of adab that you do that. You don't have to do that. Okay, so in your notes, if you said Allah, it's fine, right? This is not a matter of this halal or haram or right or wrong. It's not that issue. It's just being careful with it. Also, makes for nice alliteration, right? Devoid, divine, God, grace. So it just makes life easy. It makes it easy for us to remember. Okay, let's get into what this means. How do we unpack this? What this actually is saying in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and you can read the commentaries on it, they're very explicit, that they say anything which is devoid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mention, they put a category to it. And the category that they put into is lahu, right? They put a category to that. And broadly speaking, what they mean when they say lahu in text is that this is something which is not a net positive. It's not a net benefit. If something is not a net benefit, not a net positive, it automatically gets this term. Now you can think of anything like this. Any activity which is not a net positive, and it's not bringing you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or making you someone who is beneficial, that would be the hukm of it, lahu, which means you're in a state of distraction, right? It's a state of distraction. The Quran will sometimes use the word lahu for this, right? For example, in the verse that is going to become pivotal for our discussion at 650, which is going to be surah number 57, Surah Al-Hadid, verse number 20, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "I'lamu anama al-hayat ad-dunya la'ibun wa lahwun." This is the term Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses for distractibility. The other common synonym of this, and there are no true synonyms in the Quran, there's no such thing as a synonym, because if it was the case, Allah would have used only one word, right? There's no true synonyms, but it's used in a similar tone as this, is the word ghafla. And ghafla is to be unaware. To be unaware of what you should be aware of. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about, interestingly enough, in the chapter of the Europeans, Surah Al-Rum, many people accurately translate that. Some people say Romans. That's not what Arabs meant when they said Rum. They weren't talking about a race, they were talking about a region, right? They were talking about Europeans, right? And that's why if you look at some translators, they're very careful about this, like Arbery. He translated it as Europeans because Arbery was an archaeologist and he was an anthropologist. So he understood what Arabs would be thinking about when they said Rum. What are they referring to? Are they referring to a particular ancestral race? Or are they referring to a community? Are they referring to a land? In Surah Al-Rum, which is surah number 30, you actually find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning this. He says, يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. That these individuals, they are very aware of the worldly life, حياة الدنيا. وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ. But with regards to the akhirah, they're in complete heedlessness, being unaware or heedless. So the question is, what is the hukum? What is the legal ruling on lahu and on ghafla? What is the legal ruling on this? These are serious things. Distractibility is very serious to the Quran. For example, the surah that a lot of you are familiar with, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Al-ha, Al-ha, which is this word, in a particular verb form. Al-hakum at-takathur, right? The competition of wanting more and more, vying with each other to gain parts of the dunya and aspects of fame, wealth, assets, has deluded and distracted you. Al-hakum at-takathur hatta zurtum al-maqabir. And that's going to be the state until you visit your graves. So this is not a positive thing. Why? Why is this such a big issue in the Sharia? Why does the Quran make this such a big issue of someone not using their time with intentions of khair, with trying to do the right thing? Why is that the case? Anybody? Yes.
The dunya is very short.
Okay, so there's an idea of wal asr innal insana lafi khusr. Right? Allah's taking an oath by the decreasing nature of time. So one of the words that get very, very badly mistranslated, right? Al-asr, right? Because what is asr indicative of? All the scribbles that we're going to do that are not part of the discussion, we'll do it here, right? So the Arabs here, what's asir? Juice. Why is it called that? It's called that because you take the fruit, right? And then you squeeze it. And what happens as a result is that you only get juice because of the diminishing nature of the fruit. You have to destroy the fruit to get the juice. There's no such thing as you got the juice and the fruit is also intact. Is there such a thing? No. So you have to destroy something to get something. That's the juice. So Asr, what time is Asr Salah for us? Is when the day is being squeezed out. The day is going to be gone, right? There's few minutes left and the day is done. Why? Because Maghrib comes in and the day is gone. So Asr is the squeezing of the day. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by wal asri, He's swearing by the decreasing nature of time, the fleeting nature of time. He's not swearing by time. Because there are words in Arabic for time that are in the Quran as well. If Allah wanted to say, I swear by time, He would have said so. He's not saying that. Saying He's swearing by the decreasing nature of time. And so this is what's called qasam, right? This is the qasam, this is the oath. And so what's the jawab of the qasam? Innal insana lafi khusr. Right? The human beings are in khusr, which is loss. And so, simple question, what are human beings losing all the time? Time, right? So that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is highlighting. This is a known fact. This is not debatable. There's no one who says, no, I think I'm gaining time. Right? Or no one has access to control time, stop time, slow down time. You can't do that, right? Everybody, when it comes to time, is the object, never the subject. No access, no control over it. So this is a true statement. Allah takes an oath by the decreasing nature of time that everybody is losing time all the time. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And all those four things are to oppose ghafla and lahu. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. This person is living an intentioned life. They are making sure that as time goes by, they're not letting it pass by. They are converting this moment and putting it into their storehouses of the akhirah. So if that's the case, time didn't pass you by. You took it and you converted it into another realm. So you didn't lose time. You converted time. Yes? Otherwise, we're going to lose time. If you do something in that moment that is not momentous enough for Allah to record in khair, then that time you lost it. But إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Those people aren't just objects of their time. They are subjects of their time. They're doing something in that moment in which the time doesn't pass them by. They're able to send it to the next realm. And therefore, they haven't lost. Does that make sense? So this is the Quran's remedy of the issue of the diminishing nature of time. So excellent point. Jazakallah khairan. Someone please answer a normal answer so we don't go into like a 5-minute thing. Okay, because then we won't finish anything. Okay, so why is this such a big deal to the Quran? Like, why is this such a big problem? So we talked about the fact that it's a diminishing nature of time. Why else? Yes?
It is a hurdle towards ibadah of Allah, worship of Allah, pleasure of Allah.
So the maqsad. This is why this is the issue. So it's akin to this. You enrolled with a very heavy tuition in a study program. So you have now a purpose, which is to master the content that is being delivered, that is being administered, and to pass your exams with flying colors. Or at least that's what we all want to do. If that happens or not, that's besides the point. Okay, that's everyone's purpose, being in a classroom. Now, if there's someone within the classroom who does everything else but that, right? Then we would say that that's not the most suitable way to spend this person's time. And what would be the hukum of the university if the student continues to fail every semester? What would be the university's hukum on this person? Yeah, they're going to not be enrolled in the next term. Yes, you can't continue to fail all your classes and live to tell the tale, right? Not gonna last. Everything is like that. If someone hires someone as an employee and they have a particular task list that they have to do, a job description, and this person does everything else but what they're supposed to do, then how long are they going to last in this organization? They're not going to last long, right? Unless you make the argument, like some people made the argument in the Quran, that we are the chosen people and children of God. We get an exemption, right? That's exactly how it's quoted in Surah Al-Ma'idah. That a group of people actually told Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't actually do all the things in the program, we have an exemption, right? Obviously, in reality, that doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. So if our maqsad, our purpose is to maximize time so we're able to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do some khair around us in the moments that we're here, then everything that is not that, which is not a net positive in that direction, is going to be considered something that you can go on probation for, something that you can be chastised for. This is obvious. This is why when someone understands that their purpose here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, it's a particular system or program that has already been laid out for us that is designed for our success. And then to turn around from that and do our own thing, Allah has a phrase in that, in the Quran for that. He says, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي. So here is another term that's used in the Quran for the same thing, which is إِعْرَاضُ الذِّكْر. This is the same thing. إِعْرَاضُ الذِّكْر means to turn away from Allah's remembrance, which is the same thing as ghafla, which is the same thing as lahu. The net result is the same thing. What does he say? فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ. Then this person will have a obstacle-laden life. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement in the Quran. Whether you like this or not, or whether you think this is true or not, this is haqq. He's saying if you neglect Allah enough, then Allah will throw spanners in your life. Yes? Neglecting God does not give you a blissful life, according to the Quran. وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ. You actually have obstacles in your path, right? So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. This is what we're trying to combat. Now, if you say fiqh of leisure, right, we clearly don't mean by then fiqh of lahu, because there's no such thing. It would be batil to begin with. We can't talk about fiqh of ghafla. Let's all be in a state of complete divestment with our purpose for the next 30 minutes. Let's do that. How about that as a proposition? Let's do something for the next 30 minutes in which God is not in the equation. This is batil. This can't be a discussion. So when you and I think of leisure, we have to understand that there's no leisurely activity devoid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being factored into that activity somehow. So it's the idea of intentionality. Everything has to be intentioned. And that's the spiritual path. There's no alternative to that. Yes? So when we talk about fiqh of leisure, the first thing we understand, we are not talking about by leisure, we don't mean lahu. We don't mean ghafla, and we don't mean i'rad al-dhikr. That's not what we mean by it. What we mean by it is exactly what Abu Darda says. Abu Darda, this is quoted in the Ihya, Abu Darda rahimahullah, or radiyallahu anhu, the famous companion of the Prophet who was actually very concerned with spirituality, right? He said that innani la astajimmu fi nafsi lahwan. He said, I engage in relaxed time to relax myself in some forms of lahu. And then he gives you a reason. He says, so that I can have more rigor when I pursue the truth. See what he's doing? So what he's doing is that his intention for downtime is being charged for service. So tell me something, is that with intentionality or that's vacuous? What is it? It's with intention. He's telling you that I like to sometimes enjoy downtime. Istijmam. He wants to enjoy downtime. Why? Why does he do that? So that he can have more rigor and more potency towards doing what he is created to do. Pursue the truth. This downtime, therefore, is not considered blameworthy. Because what is its purpose? Its purpose is rejuvenation. And this is the right mindset to have when it comes to any sort of leisurely activity. It's basically a break. That's what he's saying. I take breaks from full throttle towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so I can energize myself that I can do this again. Very similar to what we do with our phones. Sometimes you have to charge your phone so that it can have full juice again. You have to charge your car so it can have full juice again. Right? Does that make sense? This is the paradigm that we're working at. Why is this important? Because there are different forms. There are different, so there's different maqasid of hayat. Maqasid al-hayat, right? So these are the different purposes that people mold into when it comes to their pursuit of living, right? And it's on a spectrum. And so the first one of them is hedonism. What is hedonism? Hedonism is the pursuit of greed, gluttony, and lust. Yes, so this is the active pursuit of greed, gluttony, and lust. That's hedonism. Okay? So a hedonistic person has lost their angelic side fully. Because do angels engage in greed, gluttony, and lust? Do they need to eat? Do they need to copulate? Do they need to have wants of things? No. And a human being is a composite of an angelic light, and they're also a composite of a mammal. We're also mammals. Mammals, at wanton will, pursue gluttony and lust. That's what mammals do, right? So there's no difference between a hedonistic person and an untrained mammal. Philosophically speaking, there's no difference. Okay, so this is lifestyle number one. Okay, there are modern manifestations of these lifestyles, actual industries in the capitalistic world that are there for these purposes, right? This is marketed, mass marketed to young people and to old people now, right? Because it's very good for capitalism. It's very good for capitalism because it's a consumer-based mindset that would revel in this. Okay, your next one is consumerism, or materialism would be more apt. So the next one is materialism. And what's the essence of materialism? It is to give value, is to give value to that which is tangible over the intangibles. Why would ethicists give this definition for materialism? Because the issue with materialism is not that someone has things. That's why the Prophet, when asked about these things, he did not have a problem with someone wealthy who has things. It is if you value those things to be greater than those things that are intangible. That's the issue. The issue is not things. The issue is what value you put on things. Another way that this was described by one of the commentators, Maharim al-Lisan, is that the Sharih said, it's not that the dunya is in this pocket, right? He said it's not in this jayb. The problem is if the dunya is in this jayb, which is where are you placing dunya? If you place the dunya in your heart, that's the issue. Dunya is not the issue, it's where you put it. Do you put it in your heart or do you put it in your hands? If you put it in your hands, you use it. If you put it in your heart, you cherish it, you value it, you honor it, it becomes your God. That's the problem, right? And that's why you have to ask yourself every time you have, you can find out if you're hit by materialism. Just ask yourself if you lose anything materially, how much does it affect you, right? Like someone hit your car or you lost something precious, which is of the material world. How much does that affect you? You're like, this is dunya, I'll get better later. And if that's your pursuit, that means you're not putting a lot of value to it. And if you put value to it, it's not because of the thing itself. Maybe it's what it meant to you. It's like, oh my God, this was my father's watch. I can't believe it broke. He gave it to me at this particular. So it's because of those intangibles that you're giving it value, not because of the tangibles, right? So that's materialism. Then you go on to the opposite side. On the opposite, there are 5 of them. So those people taking notes with pencil or something, it's 5. Then the opposite side of this, okay, is so it's called higher pursuit. Higher pursuit mastery, which is the idea, is the exact opposite of hedonism. So what is the active pursuit of? Remember, hedonism was the active pursuit of greed, gluttony, and lust. So in higher pursuit mastery, what is it that you're chasing? You're chasing the intangible pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An active pursuit with a caveat through perpetual, incremental growth of the divine realm. So that's what that is. Okay? The active pursuit of what? Through perpetual incremental growth. Perpetual incremental growth. Slowly and slowly and slowly growing your ability to do what? To get to the divine realm. To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. This is the exact opposite of hedonism. Right? The 4th one, or the second last on our list, is virtue. And what is virtue? Virtue is going to be the opposite of materialism. Right? Notice that it's not asceticism, and there's a reason for that. So what is virtue? Virtue is to give value to the intangibles over the tangibles. It's the exact opposite. Right? So I'm just going to summarize this since you guys already know this. So it is that the intangibles are greater than the tangibles. So everything is in aqs, right? So the dunya and the akhirah, which one is more important for the virtue ethics person? The akhirah, right? The body and the spirit, the ruh and the jism. So which one is going to be, which one are they going to nourish more? Are they going to nourish their ruh more, or are they going to nourish their body more? The materialist person is going to nourish their body more than they nourish their soul. And the virtue ethics driven person is going to nourish their soul over their body because they value that to be more precious. Okay? And finally, in the middle, we have the 90% of the people who are trying to pursue some form of elevation, right? So this is the aspirant, right? This is the person with an-nafs al-lawwama. These are actually Quranic concepts, okay? So this is nafs ammaratun bisu, this is nafs mutma'inna, and this is nafsul lawwama. The aspirant is someone who tries to do the right thing and gets it wrong most of the time. So lives in a state of remorse and regret and guilt, right? Because they're trying to elevate themselves on this path, but the pull of this is more. Just like understand within our body compositions, we've got our mind and our heart, and these are both valuable, precious commodities. But then we have our stomach and our private organs, which are both lower commodities, yes? So gravitationally wise, the pull is stronger towards the dunya than towards the akhirah, right? Physically speaking. And so there's a constant tug of war between our pursuits of the dunya and our pursuits of the akhirah. This person is in the middle of the tug of war, right? And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually, you might think, oh, this is not a good place to be. To be honest, Allah swears by this. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, because Allah swears by it, it becomes sacred. What are you saying? Because Allah says, لا أقسم بيوم القيامة ولا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة. He actually swears by this, right? But this is a precious, this person is very precious to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone who's trying to get over here, but they're being pulled into that direction in every possible way. But they're still trying to get there. So when they fall, they are in a state of guilt. This is very precious to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why you get all of those hadith about the ta'ib, the one who makes tawbah, and how much Allah loves that people make tawbah, right? So this is the mujahid on the path of Islah. Okay, so that person is a warrior in their pursuit of virtue. Okay, does this make sense? Now, instead of talking about all the other 4 things, which are going to become relevant when we get into the Fiqh of Leisure discussion, I just want to focus on this. Because, when you are going to be talking about doing well in a program, the teacher and the professor should tell you the ideal student and a description of the ideal student. So there's a roadmap and an ideal for us all to try and mimic and get to. What is the difference between the ideal student? So interesting enough, look at this guy. Okay. So I'm going to quote a few books. I'm going to give you like quick book summaries of this stuff, okay? So first of these is a very important book called Mastery. By George Leonard. Okay, it's a short book. You can read it in a day and a half or 2 days, to be honest. And he talks about, this is an Aikido teacher. He teaches martial arts for many, many years. And he saw great people come in who became great martial artists. And he saw a majority of the people come in and just give up after a few sessions. And so because he was doing this for a very long time, he charted out the ingredients and the attitudes which made the great people great. And he says he started to realize that this wasn't just a martial arts thing. You could do this with anything, and it works, right? So he says that you have categories of people. He says the first category of people, he calls it the dabbler. Okay, so what does he say about the dabbler? He says the dabbler is somebody who gets into something, they pursue something, and the moment it gets difficult, they leave it, right? So they quit upon difficulty. They quit upon difficulty. That's the dabbler. They quit upon difficulty. So simple example, someone recently, we're talking about Fiqh of Leisure, for leisurely time, they were watching the Australian Open, okay? And as they were watching the Australian Open, they're like, whoa, tennis is amazing, right? So they call up their really good friend and they say, hey, you want to go play tennis this weekend? And they said, yes, let's do it. So they buy tennis gear and tennis shoes and a racket and then a set of balls. And then they go out and they realize after playing a little bit that this is really hard. You can't just watch tennis and then mimic what you saw on TV onto the court, like the ball is flying outside the cage, right? And no one knows how to serve, and you don't even know the rules of this thing yet. Okay, it's the same thing with people who watch cooking shows, right? You guys know 88% of the people say who watch cooking shows that they don't try anything that they've ever watched. Right? 88%. Right? And some of us are guilty of this, right? So watch cooking shows and videos and follow particular chefs or DIY kitchen stuff on food. And how many of us comes like transfers into actually you making something? Very little. So it's absolute leisure. Okay. If you are making it, it's no longer leisure, by the way. Yes, it changes to being productive, right? And we'll talk about that in the session. How do you take something how do you convert social media into productive media? And what are the principles in which you can do that? So you no longer have to feel guilty about it, but there's a way of doing that out. So how does this work? It says the dabbler is the person who quits upon something. Dabblers are very, very, very interesting people. Why? Why are dabblers like the life of the party? They're the most interesting people you'll meet. Yes. Number one, yeah, it's like, you want to do this? It's like, yeah, why not? It's not like I have purpose in life, right? Yeah, dabblers are extremely fun people. Why else are they really fun? Because they've done so many things. So they have some level of knowledge on like a lot of things. Have you ever met those people? They're very interesting people. Like you'd have people in your friend circles. I don't want you to judge, but I'm telling you that on any topic, they'll have some things to say. But if you actually sit down, probe, there's nothing they're saying, right? It's nothing meaningful. It's just stuff they're saying. It's just like surface level fluff, okay? They also have the best garage sales, right? Because they've tried so many things, but they don't actually stay with a lot of those things. So they have brand new of things, right? Brand new. It's like, you guys know what's the top three, from the top three things was a pool table, right? You get a pool table and then they don't actually play pool. Or what happens to people's ping pong tables, it becomes a clothing rack, right? Or that's what happens to people's treadmills as well, right? Really good spot for putting all the clothes out. So that's a dabbler. A spin-off on the dabbler, or a particular mindset of a dabbler, is what he calls the obsessive. The obsessive person is someone who, like the dabbler, got into it because they were really excited about something, but they just overdid it. They just did too much of it, and now it's too much burdensome for them to actually keep going. So they quit, not because they didn't time it properly, because they didn't give it its proper right, and they overdid it. So that's the dabbler. Then the second he talks about is what he calls a hacker. And what's a hacker? A hacker pushes past the initial difficulty, okay? So pushes past the initial difficulty, but is okay being okay. The hacker is okay being okay. They get to a good place, right? Can you imagine like studying the recitation of the Quran? The hacker doesn't quit when the sheikh starts to teach about makharij and sifat, and they're just like, this is not for me. They don't quit at that stage. The dabbler will quit there. Like the dabbler will quit because they're not getting it right, so they don't want to keep up with the practice, the tamreen, so they quit there. The hacker doesn't quit there. They get to a good point where it sounds like they know their recitation well, right? So they can get by. The Quran is not bad. But the problem with the hacker is that they don't excel further. They're just okay being okay, right? They're okay being okay. It's fine. I know how to recite the Quran, right? So if you ever, it's like, do you know how to play tennis? Yes. Do you know how to cook? Yes. Do you know how to read the Quran? Yes. Do you know Arabic? Yes. Right? So the answer is yes to all of this thing. But if you actually go and see how far they've got into any of those things, it's not far, right? So have you heard of this? Like growing up with your parents' generation, they would call it the jack of all trades, right? Yeah, so that's the hacker, okay? But we're talking about the higher pursuit mastery guy, right? We're talking about this person. This person, he calls him the master. This is what he named the book on. So the bulk of the book is describing the attitudes of a master. Yes, sir. Yeah, the idea was that this is old school. The guy's really old. I don't even know if he's alive, by the way, George Leonard. He wrote this book in the 70s, 80s. So probably not alive. I don't know. Hacker in that part before computer hacking would have been a term for someone who could learn something and then get by doing it, right? If your B and C student was a hacker in the class, right? That's how they used it in Old English. Okay. And then finally, the master. And the master would be the person who is never satisfied with their current state. Okay. And they are perpetually seeking betterment. Okay. Okay. So they're perpetually seeking betterment. That's the master. So what is the difference between the hacker and the master? The hacker never stops. So if there was a graph for this, our graph would somehow look somewhat along the line of okay, where this is called mount difficulty. Okay, and so what happens at mount difficulty? Who quits here? Yeah, the dabbler would quit here, okay? So this is how far the dabbler gets. Okay, so someone who transcends mount difficulty and gets to being okay with what they are, right? So that's your hacker. The hacker quits there at that line. And where's the line for where's the dotted line for the master? It's not there. That's the arrow, right? That's the whole point. And so, for example, imagine if you had the master's attitude when it comes to the daily 5 salawat. Just imagine. What would that mean is that every single time you pray, you are not satisfied with that prayer, which is built into the Sharia, by the way, because every time you pray, you're supposed to say, Allahu Akbar, Astaghfirullah, Astaghfirullah, Astaghfirullah. Why are you apologizing? Because the idea is that it could have been better, right? And so this mindset is actually built into the Sharia. It's built into the Sunnah. Yes, perpetual growth. That's the idea. Does this make sense? Okay. Pivoting off of this, the question is, oh, by the way, pivoting off of this, the question, you move on here. You can make this come in the middle a little bit. Can I erase this board? This board? Yes. Okay. So here we go to a different book. And the book we go to is called The Triple Package by Amy Chua. Okay. And the Triple Package, her and her husband, Amy Chua became very famous in the early 2000s because she wrote a book. If anyone read the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom. Okay, so she wrote that, one person. Yeah, a couple of people. So she wrote that book about raising resilient and successful children. It was actually a memoir. She tells you how she raised brilliant people because she was living in New York. She was extremely successful. And that time there was a lot of woke liberal agenda around raising children. As in, you don't tell children what to do. Children will tell you what to do. You don't say, come to dinner. Say, what would you like for dinner? Right? So she was like, she's Chinese. She was like, what is this? Right? This is not a thing. Like, why are we making this into a thing? And because she was a very successful corporate person, everyone around her was of this mindset. So she says, I'm just going to prove this. I'm just going to prove you guys all wrong. So she had a daughter, and then she had another daughter, and she put them through this extremely regimented samurai-style discipline. Okay? And of course, both of her daughters are extremely successful and, professional musicians and professional athletes. And one's a lawyer, the other one's a doctor. It's some absolute magic that she pulled up. And she said, this is not magic. This is how everyone used to raise their kids. Like everyone did this for years and centuries, right? Because they realized the kids are not the bosses and they don't know what's good for them. And that's why you do have to manipulate them towards doing the right thing, right? Anyways, recently, her second last book was The Triple Package, in which her husband and her studied every single successful corporation or country or institution, university, and they were looking for, are there common markers? Are there things that successful people, organizations, universities, capitalistic communities, and countries, do they believe in something that is working? Is there a recipe for greatness? This is what they were trying to figure out. And in her research, she figures out 3 things. Yes, sir. Yes. I completely forgot about online people. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you cannot master everything, right? So you master that which is purposeful. And that's why I didn't answer that, because we're still building that, right? I'm building a narrative. We'll solve it. It's a puzzle. It comes together. But I didn't want to talk about leisure before this, because then what it becomes is that, is this halal? Is this haram? Is this haram? And it doesn't, we don't think about what we're actually asking or saying. Actually, after this, maybe a lot of the questions that you have, you will be able to answer yourself. You need to ask someone, okay? So they said that there are 3 things that every successful person, country, organization, team, like they study sports teams that perpetually win. And then eventually they started losing. For example, they studied the San Antonio Spurs when they were on that winning high. Do you guys remember that? Or you guys were you guys, some of you remember that, okay. Or corporations that were really small, and then they changed something about their corporate culture and they became really successful. Like, for example, Nike, right? And Bose. They looked at these patterns of like, where were these growth spurts and what was causing these growth spurts? And so they successfully identified it. And so the first thing is high sense of superiority. That was the first one they put. High sense of superiority. The second one, high levels of insecurity. Right? And the third one is grit or perseverance. Right? Or they said delayed gratification. See what it said. So anyone who exhibits these 3 things in tandem automatically would be optimized to be great. This was their conclusion, right? So how did they get to this? Firstly, high sense of superiority. What that means is I am the chosen one. Okay? That's what that means. Okay? When you say high sense of superiority, I am the chosen. So for example, in all of Central and South America, the country that produces the most amount of intellectuals, PhDs, whatnot, is Cuba, right? And Cubans inherently in their culture believe that Adam was a Cuban. I'm not making this up. Any Cubans in the audience? Anyone from Cuba? Cubans believe Adam went from heaven and landed in Cuba, right? They actually believe they are descendants of the first people directly, like regionally, right? And children are grown up in Cuba with a particular level of flair for Cuban pride and the fact that they're the most elite of all the other South Americans, right? Anyways, that's that. High sense of insecurity, which is I don't deserve to be the chosen one. So this is called the golden paradox, which is you have a very strong sense of self-worth, but you also have a complete awareness that you're not living up to your potential. right? So there's constant conversations of growth. Like you're meant for greatness, but you're not acting like that. Yes, it's built into the systems. It'll be built into the companies, built into the attitudes. But like athletes who are at the top echelons of their sports usually tend to rank themselves below the best in performance. It's a phenomenon, right? So they have like excerpts from Kobe Bryant, from Roger Federer, across different streams, where they feel like they're not playing to their best level. And literally they're the number one ranked person in that field, and they're saying they think in their own head that they could be performing better than what they're performing now. So which is, I am the chosen one, but I don't deserve to be the chosen one. And then the last ingredient is grit, which is, I'm not going to quit until I deserve it, until I deserve the title, the chosen one. Right? So it is the ability to push back on further resistance. Now, if that's the case for how do you get these ingredients, just have a quick question for you guys before we get into our last book, then we can tie this together. Anybody who's read these type of things, what is the number one book on, what's the number one book ever on becoming successful, becoming the best version of yourself? Before all this modern self-help industry was there, this is the book that is the second most sold book after the Bible, right, in history. Yes? No, Atomic Habits is very new. Yes? It's the Quran? No, dude, the Quran transcends this kind of discussions. We don't bring the Quran to these things. Yes?
Is it that Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People?
No, but it's from that same genre, same era. Yes?
Is it the 48 Laws of Power?
No, that's very new. Anybody? Anybody? It's like Dale Carnegie's.
7 Habits?
Yes, it's 7 Habits from Stephen Covey. Okay? It's the most sold book, right? So it's the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. We'll do it over here. Okay? So Highly Effective People. Okay, it's by Stephen Covey. And the 7 habits he puts into 4 chapters. Okay? Chapter 1, he says, these people who have highly successful and effective people, meaning great people who get things done. Look, we're looking at the same problem from different lenses. Okay? That's one lens, that's one lens, this is a third lens. So principles and paradigms. He says the first chapter in his book is Principles and Paradigms, which is they must stand for something. If you want to be a great person, you must stand for something. You must have something you believe in. There has to be a cause, okay? There has to be a cause of vision. Number 2, the second thing he says is that they must have what's called a private victory. A private victory is something that they put their own vision into action and they prove it to themselves. So for example, if your thing is healthy eating, you want to make sure that everyone eats healthy and you eat healthy, you can't be just like hiding Snicker bars and Reese's when no one's looking, right? Because now you won't have a public victory. If you're going around telling people to be mindful with their time, you can't just now you yourself waste time from time to time because you're going against what you're preaching. So you'll never be great because you have a vision, but you don't have a mission. And you need both. Okay? Private victory is how you get your mission manifested. Okay? It's your roadmap. Otherwise, it's just theory. It's just you say things. Doesn't mean much. Third is you can't be selfish. You need to have what he calls a public victory, which is if you struck gold, you got to tell everyone that you struck gold, and you got to get them some. That's how you become legendary. Like if you're doing all these great things, but no one benefited from you, no one's going to remember you. You have no legacy, right? Your greatness dies when you die, right? So you need to have what's called a public victory, which is you need to have a movement, right? You spark a movement. Number 4 is that through all of these stages, life is going to get very difficult and it's going to get very turbulent. So you better be able to renew and rejuvenate. You better be able to renew. What does that mean? That means you're able to go back and revive your principles and paradigms when things get difficult. So it gives you further drive. Okay? So renewal is grit. You don't give up. And you revive and rejuvenate. Correct. If you're on this pursuit, how much time do you think someone who's trying to live life with a conscious, intentional way like this, how much downtime do they have in a day? Just asking you. How much? What do you think? We take out all the sleep time, take out all the time that they need for their essentials, whether it's work or school or whatever their community needs as a demand from them. Just take that out. How much time do they have in which they can think of something leisurely to do? You think it's going to be a lot? It's going to be a lot for this guy, okay? And it's going to get less and less and less. And by the time you get here, it's going to be very little time, okay? It's going to be a lot. If someone's a dabbler in everything, they don't have a lot of time. They take a few more projects on at the same time. But as they're going up here, if someone is chasing mastery in 2, 3, 4 things in their life, they won't have a lot of downtime. So before we get into the fiqh of leisure, understand that the entire conversation, whether this leisurely thing is good or not good, is going to be a very small chunk of your life if you're an intentioned human being. Because if you're an intentioned human being, you're pursuing mastery. And if you're pursuing mastery, you might not have a lot of time for leisure. Is that true or not true? Does this make logical sense? Okay, so I'm going to now ask you guys to try and find this. So can we get verses? Any hufad here? Raise your hand if you're half the Quran. Okay, can you guys go to Fatir? Surah Fatir. Get me ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا. What verse number is that? 32? Okay, so everyone go into your Quran apps. And if you can't go into your Quran app, go to Quran.com/35/32. Quran.com/35/32. Okay, and somebody read me the English translation of that verse. So since the brothers gave me the verse number, one of the sisters, can you guys read me the English translation of 35:32, Surah 35, verse 32? Anybody is there? Yes, go ahead. Perfect. You can stop there. Okay, so what did we find? Some wrong themselves. When it comes to the Quran, Allah says there are 3 types of attitudes. Some wrong themselves, some chose a middle path, and some sabiqum bil khairat. They always try to be at the forefront of good, always trying to reach the horizon and push it further, right? Perpetual incremental growth, okay? So this is 35:32. Can you guys go to Surah Al-Hajj, last page, Ma qadarullaha haqqa qadrihi, verse number? What's the verse number there? وَمَا قَدَرَ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. What is it? 74. So 22:74. Can you get to وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ? Someone find وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Another person find for me وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. Oh, no, not that one. What is it? 1770. 95:4. And also Al-Imran, خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran explicitly tells us that we are chosen people. Actually, even in that verse, 35, 32, he says, ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا. The people that we chose for this book to be inherited, meaning people who have the Quran inherited, they're chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're the chosen people, right? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in 1770, he says the children of Adam are ennobled over all other creatures. In 95:4, he says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. That we created the human beings in the best form. In 3:10, he says, you are the best ummah for the service of mankind. Isn't that a high sense of superiority? Anyone reading those verses, they would know that they're just chosen people of Allah. But then in the Quran, there's a genre of verses where Allah is telling us, we're not up to a lot of good. Right? They'll say they haven't given Allah the due, the right that He deserves. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu aminu. O people who claim to believe, properly believe. What's wrong with you? Right? Sometimes He will actually say this, Malakum. What is wrong with you? Right? What's going on? You're not on track anymore. What happened? You find this in later Medinan Quran. This is a salient theme in Medinan Quran. Even the Sahaba are being told, getting a little rusty here, aren't we? Right? What's that verse in Hadith? Yeah, both of them. Verse numbers. You need verse numbers. So 57. Because the students are taking notes, you want to make sure their notes are complete. You can reference it. لا تؤمنوا أن ألا تؤمنوا لا تنفقوا أن ألا تؤمنوا. Where's it? 8? Right? And there, I said, there's a whole genre of verses like that. What about grit, perseverance? There's a lot of verses, but you can suffice with Allah telling the Sahaba to not give up. Right? The last verse of Surah Al-Imran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu isbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu wattaqullah. Right? Be fortified, make sure that you're resilient, don't give up, be patient and persevere. Okay? What does this tell you? It tells you that the ingredients that a social scientist would study for years and decades to try and figure out would be there. Okay? And this is the most known or sold book, yes. The content of this book can be summarized into these 4 chapters. Principles and paradigms, private victory, public victory, and renewal, right? And you can find all of them. A 4-year-old Muslim kid knows all of these. 4-year-old Muslim kid knows this entire thesis. How so? Because one of the first surahs that they'll memorize is Wal Asr, Innal Insana Lafi Khusr, Illa Alladhina Amanu wa Amilu Salihati wa Tawasaw bil Haqqi wa Tawasaw bil Sabr. Like 4-year-old children in the Muslim Ummah have this memorized, right? So this is Surah Al-Asr, Surah 103. Okay? So what I wanted to show you, that if anybody is pursuing the Quranic model abd, what's the model abd of the Quran, then they will find that this issue of leisureliness is not going to be a mainstay in their life. It's going to be needed here and there. Very simple example, without being controversial. You guys know the mantra, right? Is to be what? Is to be thought-provoking and not provocative, right? So everything I'm saying here is not to start a dilemma or a discussion or a debate, just giving you an insight on these things, right? If, for example, the question of somebody who says that I'm here to this majlis because I want to find out the hukum of whether music is permissible or not permissible, right? And that's why they're here. They're here on the Fiqh of Leisure thing to figure that one question out. I would say to an individual of that nature that that's valid. You can seek the answer to that. That's fine. Let me tell you something. If you are pursuing a higher pursuit, this question is very irrelevant. Because it presupposes you have time to put into your ears that which is not a net positive for you. It presupposes that. So this is an irrelevant question for an individual who's like over here, who's trying to do all this stuff, because they might not have the bandwidth to even engage in this, right? And likewise with several other questions. This is one of the things I mentioned at the beginning, that if you get on with the program as to what is being talked about, there might not be a lot of need for those type of questions. So here's a general principle now, right? We have one principle at the beginning. Where'd it go? Did I erase it? I think I erased it. We had one principle, the ad-dunya mal'una. Second principle, folks, is that all of this leisurely stuff is going to be in the sense of things being easy for others and difficult for yourself. This is the attitude of somebody who is conscious about their place in society and is trying to do well. What's the principle? Everything more difficult for the self, in the sense that what is optimum for the self, and tolerance for the others. That's the attitude we have to adopt, especially in leisurely matters, especially in these fatawas. So if there's a fatwa which is very strict and ihtiyatan, like it's cautionary fatwa, and there's a fatwa which is very laxed, because some fuqaha are laxed on a lot of things and some fuqaha are very strict on a lot of things. So you take the stricter fatwa for yourself and apply the easier fatwa when you deal with other people, right? Okay, with that being said, everyone understands things that were on the board. If there are any questions here, please ask. Yes. Yeah, it's the perpetuality, right? It's the idea that the person who is in a higher pursuit of mastery, they're never satisfied with where they are. That doesn't mean they're not grateful. A lot of people confuse that. It's like someone who's not satisfied with where they are spiritually. That doesn't mean they're not grateful for where they are today. Like the Mufassirun, they say, you know the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. In Surah Al-Furqan, Allah mentions a scenario in which someone is ignorant people and impetuous people are trying to pick a fight with a righteous person. So this person doesn't engage and it says, I come in peace, right? Some of the Mufassirun say that the right adab for that is to actually make dua for the person who is trying to engage with you with ignorance, and to be grateful that you're not the person who's engaging with other people with ignorance. So knowing that you are grateful, but simultaneously that you're not where you should be. So you're perpetually in the growth state. Okay, good question. Any other questions on what's on the board? Okay, yes, yeah.
I had a question for a while back. It was about the reform the heedless, like those who are heedless of Allah.
Yes.
Have like
A difficult thing, yeah. Mhm.
I was just wondering the reconciliation of that in regards to like just the non-Muslims as well who spend their time and like atheists in that sense.
Yeah.
Because even though we can't say like they have their benefits they're due in this world, that wouldn't in a sense answer this question in that case.
No, this is because of a lens. You have to look at it from the lens of reality. And reality is not appearance. So what that means is that you can have someone, do you guys know about Richard Corey? Do you remember Richard Corey did we do Richard Corey with you guys? No? Okay. There's an interesting poem by Arlington. It's called Richard Corey. You pop it up, and it's this town in which there's this guy called Richard Corey, who's the most well-dressed, well-spoken, extremely rich, very put together. All the guys want to be like him, and all the girls want to be with him, right? And then the poem ends that one day we got news that Richard Corey shot himself dead. And what the poet wanted to highlight is that appearances and reality are two different worlds, right? They're two different realms. They're two different worlds. So what you see when you see other people in bliss, you have no idea that distancing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what type of tsunamis are brewing in their hearts. We don't know that, right? And that's why a very, very poor, extremely disheveled Muslim who is one with his Lord, who has tawheed, right, could be in whatever state they be in, and they would be in complete bliss compared to other people who might have palaces, because it's not the external that is of value, it's the internal. And you don't know the state of their hearts, right? And look, testing is never going to stop for anybody, which means that everyone who's got everything together also is being severely tested. Like people of Allah are tested the most because they have something to prove, right? So you get out of financial difficulty, a financial test, there's a health test, like a physical fitness, health issue. You get out of that, there's a community test. You get out of that, there's a reputation test. You get out of that, there's a family relationship test. You get out of that, there's back to financials test. This is normal. This is what's supposed to happen. This is not the issue, right? It says the difference is that a person who's pursuing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not shaken by the vicissitudes of their tests. It doesn't affect them. It's just another day in dunya. It's just dunya, right? The max it can do is put you down, right? Yeah. Yes. 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 Yes.
Where can you draw the line of like pushing yourself and like, oh, I don't need a break, and also I do need a break, but like maybe staying in that like idea of, oh, this is the break I'm taking.
This is a good question. Yeah. This is a good question because we are unfortunately plagued by this modern phenomenon of what's called the hustle culture, or you can sleep when you die, brother, right? And that's what's killing the guy because he's not sleeping enough, right? So you have to be very careful of this because the Prophet didn't like extremes. He didn't like ghulu in things. He was not a fan of this. That any virtue in excess is vice. This is from Kierkegaard, but this is a valid principle, that anything good, if you overdo it and you don't take breaks and you don't value it and you don't understand it fully and you're not meaningful in it, you're not intentioned, it's going to lead to vice, right? So if you always volunteer, I'm giving you an example. If you volunteer and volunteer and volunteer, and because of that, your marks are being affected. Because of that, your pursuits in Islam are being affected. Your worship is being affected. But you're doing all this virtuous volunteering everywhere. This is not virtuous. It isn't, right? You don't have to be deluded into thinking you're doing the right thing because I'm helping everybody out. No. Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. Save yourself and then your family from the fire, then your people from the fire. You have to save yourself, right? When the Prophet found out there was a group of people that would worship all night and don't sleep, he was not happy with them. He told them not to do it. When he found out there were people who had chosen to be celibate and not marry, he said, no, I'm a prophet, I marry. Right? When he found out people were fasting every day, he said, I'm a prophet. I fast some days and I don't fast other days. Meaning there's no virtue in overdoing virtuous things, right? Actually, it's a vice. Right? That's why there's i'tidal in the religion that's built in. That's what some of the mufassirun said, that this is what it means, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, that we have made you a moderate middle nation, right? That the sunnah is moderation. Yes, the sunnah is moderation. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. How do you battle it? How do you balance it? You need to make sure that if you're in anything that is essential, by essential, I actually mean that. Anything that is essential and you're neglecting it, there's no excuse for that. If people have rights over you and you're not fulfilling those rights, there's no excuse for that. The huquq of the people around you is afdal to your own pursuits of the nawafil. There's no virtue in all of these things. We should be very careful. Yes, sister, go ahead.
So I kind of want to get your input on this westernized notion of like identity thefts, where people are continuously worshiping themselves in the sense that they're like, okay, it's me, myself, and I need to take care of myself, I need to give myself like enough time to, rejuvenate and stuff. So one way that one route that they take about it is traveling,
Yes.
which sometimes that becomes like a career pursuit for some.
Yeah.
And so necessarily they're not really benefiting the community, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of issues that you need to tackle with that. So like what's your
Yeah, good. That's a good observation. So this is a symptom of a different disease, actually, and you kind of hinted to it. But do you ever notice something that when we recite Surah Fatiha, even in a solitary prayer, that we say Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, that we make the dua in plural, which makes no sense, to be honest, because if this is a conversation between Allah and me and it's supposed to be intimate, the salah in isolation is supposed to be for qurba, right? You guys know, legally speaking, the salah in a jama'ah is not for closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's for validity. But the salah that you do in private is supposed to be for closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why in fiqh it's more relaxed. Right? But the salah in a jama'ah, like the fard prayers, because they're meant to be in jama'ah, even if you pray them by themselves, but they're fard prayers, it is a very official prayer. It's like very formal. Right? Like you shouldn't do stuff in it. Like there's no creativity in this. Right? But the salah that you do for tahajjud, the salah that you do in your nawafil, they're more laxed in the acceptability of this prayer. Why? Because the purpose of this is qurbah. So you know you get all these hadith where the closest a slave is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in there. Sajda. Should you do that in a fard prayer? Like the imam?
It take a long time.
Yeah. No. Why? Because all of those narrations, right? What about the tulul qiyam of the Prophet ﷺ? Where is that? In the fard prayers? It's never in these prayers because the fard prayer is like the valid prayer. You do it. It's all in the nafil prayers and the tahajjud prayers. But why in the tahajjud prayers we're still making dua in the plural? What about the Prophet ﷺ? When did he go to the Hira? When did he go to Ghar Hira? Before prophethood or after prophethood? Before. Tell me where he took a retreat after prophethood, where he went for some me time. Yeah, but that's family. That's not me time. That's his ahl. This is family.
He did.
He didn't. The Prophet ﷺ, he is with his people. He is in service to his people. This is why Razi and Ibn Juzay and other Mufassirun, they say that the whole religion is merely two things, right? Ibadatul khaliq wa khidmat al-makhluq. This is it. There's no third thing. Everything you're doing is either worship to Allah or service to the creation of Allah. There's no third alternative to this. So it's actually a bigger issue. The issue is not understanding that there is a responsibility of an individual to be connected to the group, right? And that responsibility for men, it's so obvious because of the salawat. They're in jama'ah. It's so obvious. You can't escape it, right? And for women, for health purposes, every study after study after study says we're running a weird experiment. We're literally experimenting with our psychological states, right? And then 10, 15, 20 years, the results will be out for a lot of people choosing to cut off from human interactions. For example, just to give you an example, giving a child a cellular device which engages their prefrontal cortex before it's fully developed, what that does is that it makes them dependent on a particular interaction void of other human beings. Is that the case? Yes. Right? They're not interacting with other human beings, but they are engaged with something. Right? What that does is that it trains the person to be independent of the other. They don't need other people to spend time, to be engaged, to get access to things. To the point where most people, it'd be very difficult for them to actually spark a conversation with a random person that they don't know. It'd be just difficult to do. This would be a common skill that everyone had back in the day, everybody. But it'd be very difficult to do. What's the disadvantage? The disadvantage is that there's a spike of 4 times as many autistic sort of symptoms in children today than before. We've actually successfully created a non-biological autism. This never existed, but autism is a neurological condition, right? But now we know that it can be learnt, and it doesn't have a neurological issue, it has a network issue. So you can actually learn to be autistic. So you're not autistic like in a brain scan, you'll be like a normal person. But because of your interactions with other human beings and lack thereof, you'd have autistic symptoms. And everyone thought, oh, this is bad for children. And now we're finding out that actually adults are getting diagnosed with self-imposed autism. Like functioning adults. Because they don't have the need or the skill set or the ability to converse with another human being and bond. And this is so intrinsic, by the way, that if you actually watch 2 people walk from a distance and they're in conversation, they don't realize, but their feet get synchronized. They don't realize this. Yes? There's a synchronization of the internal realities when you're in proximity and engaging with other human beings. Women who are in the same proximity for a very long time and are engaging with each other, their menstrual cycles line up. Yes? Because human beings are not affected by the spiritual states of the people around them. Right? That's why the guy who figured this out, by the way, he was a watchmaker. And he once left his store and came back and he found that all the pendulums were swinging in the same harmony. And he said, there's no way I did that. So he purposely off-tuned them. Then he left home, he came back the next morning and they're all in the same thing. And so he figured out that there is a harmonious principle in the world, right? And it's just a thing. So what happens when you're around people with really virtuous, positive hearts? You match their frequency. You're around them, you match their frequency. This is why in the Islamic tradition, suhbah is such an important thing, because suhbah is actually not just for ilm. It's because you're matching on and imprinting the other person's spiritual state. So if they speak a particular way, you want to speak like that. And if they think a particular way, you want to think like that. So imagine if you surround yourself with all of these spiritually alpha people, I like to call them, like the spiritually alphas. If you surround yourself with spiritual alphas, then you elevate your maqam. And likewise, if you surround yourself with, the devilish alphas, then you're going to start saying things you've never said before in your life. It's like, I've never said this. How did this happen? This is going to naturally take place. So that's absolutely true. There is no retreat. People could do that. People could do retreats. I have no problem with that. But they have to do it with intentionality. They're like, I am not well. I need to take some time to get better so I can serve people, so I can come back and do this, right? So almost like rehab. It's like, I'm not well. I need to do some reflection and these things. And Shaykh al-Khatri says you should have some alone time in the day where you're doing muraqabah. You're thinking about the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take you to task, right? Because this is what Sayyidina Ali said, right? Hasibu qabla an tuhasabu. Yes, Umar. He said, take yourself to account before you are taken to account, right? So based on that, there is virtue in retreat, but for what purpose? Not to indulge, right? But to chastise, to point a finger at yourself and say, you haven't done the right thing and you need to recommit. So then retreats are okay, because those retreats are done for what purpose? They're done so that you can come back from the retreat and actually serve, right? And be transformed. So that's a good question. Any other questions? So there's a bunch of narrations that I want to just clarify before we finish, so that there's some fiqh that we did, right? So that the MSA doesn't get, they get in trouble for false marketing. Said this was Fiqh of Leisure, and we read random stuff, right? We don't know what this is. Okay. Do we have more time? Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. So a few things I want to point out from the standpoint of the legal tradition from the fuqaha, okay? First of them is that the general hukam on all things lahu is debated. One group said all things lahu is haram. Another group says, no, all things lahu is makruh, right? So there's a debate from the legal scholars with regards to what is the hukam on something which has zero value. You binge watch something, which is permissible. By the way, if it's not permissible to watch, you can't watch anyways. It's not what we're talking about, okay? We're talking about something which is permissible to engage in, but it's not net positive for you, and you're not intentioned enough. So what's the hukam on this? One group said this is haram, the other group said this is makruh. All right? Number one. Number two, yes?
Before that, I know you just touched on it. Can you define for us, maybe with examples of lahu, exactly what lahu is and what it isn't?
Yeah, so lahu, broadly speaking, is anything which would be a form of distraction from the pursuit of God, right? Broadly speaking, it'd be anything which is a distraction from the pursuit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why I said intentionality is important. So a gym session is ibadah with intention and is lahu without intention. See what that means? A gym session is ibadah, 90 minutes at the gym, that could be all worship, because you intend by it that you're going to rejuvenate your body, so you could have more energy and strength to serve Allah and His people. And you're going to be fit for later on in your years when you're really old. Your worship is not going to get affected because of your age, because you're physically fit. You don't have to sit on a chair and pray. You don't have to take a wheelchair to Umrah and Hajj. Yes, and that's your intention. You want to have this intention that you bond with your children in your old age so that they're able to experience fatherly bonds. So you're able to transfer to them the turath of the Sharia. And you want to be an engaged father, an engaged mother. If that's your intention for working out, what you've done is because of your intention, because this is the qaida, intention can take a mundane act and elevate it to the level of worship. The intention can do that. That's what we mean. Okay, so that's the first thing with regards to lahu. An example of a completely lahu-based things, without intention, 2 hours of a chess game. I'm not saying this randomly. The fuqaha actually say this. The fuqaha use chess as one of the examples for lahu, because in their time, as you know, chess can take a long time, and a lot of the male population in the Abbasid times was head over heels in chess. It was like a cultural phenomenon in Baghdad, to such a point where there was absolute fatwas of hurma on chess, like it's haram. And that's why you find those fatwas today by big ulama, and sometimes you read this like, why does he think chess is haram? Because you don't understand what was happening in his community. If today there was such a craze for a particular sport that people, it happens on Jumu'ah and no one comes to Jumu'ah. Doesn't this happen from time to time, where some World Cup final or some Olympic thing happens on Jumu'ah and major masajids have a dip in attendance? Actually, that would be haram to do. This is haram because according to the madhahib, it's wajib. Jumu'ah for the muqim, the resident, is mandatory. So if someone's not coming to Jumu'ah because they're watching a sporting event, at that moment, that sporting event is haram for this person. Right? Why? Because again, distractibility from the dhikr of Allah. That's how we define lahu. There's no intention for this. What's the intention? I'm going to watch this and skip the Jumu'ah because I'm going to pray a harder asr. Right? Like, what's your intention? Like, there's no intention that is valid for this. Right? That's what we mean. The reason why chess is used as a classical example, because that would have been timely for them. Right? If anyone's interested in the chess thing, there's a really nice article. I can't remember now what it's called. Right? But it's a nice article. You Google it. It's by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Did a deep dive into the classical opinion of chess. All right. And the permissibility and impermissibility of chess. Right? Yeah.
Dad loves to play chess. And you want to play chess with your dad with the intention that you're spending time.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Should you do it with that intention, or should you try and get your dad to do something else? But then what do you do if he won't do something else? Like,
No, this is a good question. So your intentionality is great, right? But the father's intentionality would be to question here. And remember, the asl is that your job is to try and make sure that no distractibility from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has happened. So in those 2 hours, if there's a salah, then everybody has to take a break and go pray. But if the salah comes in and leaves, when salakha minhu, right? If the salah comes in and leaves, then both people are guilty. Because now you're supposed to pause everything for the fard prayer and perform the prayer and then resume life. If that is not happening, then the thing that took you away, whether it's permissible in regular circumstances or not, at least in this case, is impermissible. Why? Because it took you away from the pursuit of God. Okay? This is rewarding. No, opposite. It's rewarding. Yeah.
something not chess, like let's say one of your parents loves to watch a show.
Yeah.
and you see it's not, like,
Well, I see what you did there. You see that? You see that? It was like, he's going to say yes to this. And then, there's the curveball, right? Yeah.
not the most permissible show, like maybe the way people dress is not the best or something like that.
Yes.
And so you want to spend time with your parents and you know they're gonna sit down and watch that show.
Yeah.
But you don't want to sit down and watch that show. Like,
Yes.
should you?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to repeat her question in my own way to make it easier for me to answer. Okay. So here's the question. If you have a particular spiritual maqam, which deems a particular thing lowly for you, and now you engage with somebody else who's dear to you, a parent, a sibling, a spouse, children, cousins, friends, and for them, this particular thing is not lowly. This actually is the norm, or in some cases, even mahmuda. So in this case, sorry, even praiseworthy. So in these cases, what do you do? Right. So generally speaking, your job is of a murabbi now. If you are more spiritually inclined to do the right thing, then the person you're engaging with, you're the murabbi. Like whether regardless of their age, you are now their spiritual caretaker. Okay? So as their spiritual caretaker, sometimes because you know who this person is, you have to pull the plug, their plug. Sometimes you have to have a discussion. Sometimes you have to wean them off the thing that they're addicted to. Wean them off slowly, right? And in doing so, as long as the thing is not outright haram, there is no haraj in engaging in it. With the intention that you're getting in there so that you influence them, not you get influenced by them. That's the key. If they're doing something and it's influencing you, then you have to pull out. But if you're doing something and it's influencing them, then your presence in there is the wisdom. You being in that room, you pressing their feet while they watch that show and talking to them about the fact that perhaps this is not the wisest way to spend your time, or going from 1 hour of it to 40 minutes of it and then later on just 20 minutes of it. This is you intentionally weeding them off of this. This is actually mahmud. It's a good thing to do, right? This question recently was asked. I was in a majlis, and this question was asked to Sheikh Tabriz by one of his students, like senior students. And Sheikh basically says that you should know the reality of the person you're talking to. Is this person a person who values their time with Allah? And if it is, you rebuke them. And you say, what are you doing? This is wrong. You know it's wrong, right? With wisdom. But you let them know, like, you see what you're doing, right? I don't want you to be deluded into thinking this is something good. Okay, but if this person is distant from spending a lot of quality time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, then you understand that they have a bigger problem. It's not this TV show. There's an attitude by which they feel like they don't need to be spending a lot of time with Allah. That attitude is the issue. This is just a symptom. So cure the actual attitude, which is to get them to be more intention, get them to taste the halawa of ibadah, right? Ask them, talk to them, speak to them, converse, things that you're learning, discuss it with them. And eventually, inshallah ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will melt their hearts, right? Like just today, some brother is going for for Umrah, and he was telling me, Ustadh, I'm leaving Friday. Any advice do you have? Everyone has been telling me to make sure I touch the Hajar al-Aswad. And I said, who's doing this? Like, who says this to people when they're going for Umrah? It's like number one thing, don't forget to touch the Hajj. Because it doesn't affect your Umrah, but in no madhab, it affects your Umrah, right? And I'm telling him, look, the bigger problem when you go for Umrah is the rock. It's the Hajar Aswad. But the problem is people think Hajar Aswad is out there. The problem is the Hajar Aswad is in here. Everyone's got a black heart, right? They should be trying to touch that and make that more malleable. That's why you're going to Umrah. It's not for that Hajar Aswad, right? It's this Hajar Aswad that all of us are carrying around with us, the black heart that needs to be rectified, right? So it's the same thing. If someone, their issue is their neglect of Allah, the symptom might be an obsession with a particular TV show, right? And if you spend so much time on the symptom, it's a band-aid. It doesn't help. You have to spend time with the actual cause, right? To change their mindset through discussion, through service. If you're children and you have parents who are recalcitrant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as children, it is your job to win their heart. It's not enough, that you just say, Ya Allah, Ya musarrif al-qulub, sarrif qalbahu. Like, you can't do this stuff. This is good dua you should always do anyways. But you're a child for a reason. You're in this room for a reason, right? So that is, you have to take it back and see what you can do to make a difference, right? With strategy. Yes, go ahead.
Can leisure sometimes disguise itself as fun worship, such as only doing MC Khatna, instead of more difficult or less amusing aspirations like studying and
So repeat the question for everybody. The question is, if someone is in the khidmah of a particular cause, right? And this comes as it comes with a set understanding that if you're pursuing this particular khidmah, this service that you're doing for other people, that you wouldn't be able to do some other things that are virtuous. For example, extra worship, learning for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and other forms of things. What should you prioritize, right? This is the same question as when people say, should we, as an adult, not as children, should we memorize the Quran, learn the Arabic language, or study this or study that? And I always tell people, that you should do something in which you're not neglecting anything essential of your deen. If you want to be a student of knowledge, you have to memorize some Quran. You have to. It's not an option. If you want to be a serious student of knowledge, you have to memorize the Quran. You have to have the niyyah that eventually I'll have the whole Quran memorized. And you just work towards it. There's no other way out of it. You guys say, I'm going to be, inshallah ta'ala, a serious student of knowledge. Yeah, the hifz thing is not essential for ulama. Who said this? Tell me great ulama who weren't hafaz. They say like, oh, Shaykh Anwar Shah Kashmiri was not a hafiz of the Quran. He knew the Quran. You know, a lot of the ulama, they didn't say they were hafaz because of what that meant. Because they want to say this, right? Because a true hafiz would be someone who has faham and amal on everything in the Quran. And like, who's this person? Tell me. Do you know someone who's a true hafiz with that definition? That they have the faham of the entire Quran and they have acted on the whole Quran. Do you know someone like that? Does anyone know someone like that? So if that's your definition, are you going to say you're a hafiz of the Quran? No one's going to say this. Why would you say this? You know? I asked Sheikh Jalal about this issue. You know, Sheikh Jalal said, anybody, he said, in our culture, which is the ulama of Misr, the qurra of Misr, the senior qurra of Egypt, he said, anybody who doesn't have all the qira'at memorized, we don't consider them hafiz. So what is he, like anyone hafiz now, right? Most people you know, are they hufad? They're not hufad. So when people say things like that, it's just silly. It's absolutely silly to say things like that, right? That, oh, this person didn't have the Quran memorized. Like someone tell me, it's like, I told them that I got this particular view because I discussed this for 3 hours with Dr. Akram. And he said to me, but Dr. Again, I'm not saying anything about this person. I don't even know this person, actually. They said, but Dr. Akram, he's one of the ulama, he hasn't had the Quran memorized. You know? I said, you really think there's a verse of the Quran that he can't give you an explanation for? Do you think that? You think he doesn't know this? I mean, this is what he's been doing for 55 years, right? Mufti, yeah, all these people. You think there's a verse you can bring up? It's like, oh, I don't complete jahil about this verse. I don't know what to say. It's not possible. You cannot imagine this thing, okay? Especially if you've sat and listened to them do tafsir and them connecting the entire Quran. It's not true. What I'm trying to say to you is that you should be very careful in how you spend time. Right? And not everyone is the same. There are people who are intellectuals by default. They have no service bone in their body. Okay? They just can't. All right? But you can get this kid to sit down and study for 7 hours, they'll do it and they'll enjoy it. But if you tell them, okay, we're going to be at this place and we're going to take all the desks and lay it out, and they're going to take all the chairs and lay out. And while they're doing it, they're like, I could have been studying ilm, right? This is a colossal waste of my time, right? And the other person, you can't keep him in a class for 7 minutes. Like in 30 minutes in, the sheikh will say something and their mind will go somewhere else like, I have an idea. Next meeting we have, we're going to, and that's what they're doing. They're not paying attention to anything the sheikh said after that, because they just got this bout of idea about some service they want to give to the community, and that's where they're at. So why do you want this service guy to force him to be in 7 hours of ilm? This is torture for this guy. And likewise, that ilmi guy, why do you want him, setting up tables? He's an asset to your community. He's going to be good there, right? So this is important to understand that not everybody is going to, again, you have to dabble in certain things and then master other things, right? And wisdom will tell you what to dabble in. So what should you not dabble in? Your relationships. You shouldn't dabble in your relationships, okay? You shouldn't, right? So for example, if you are a husband or a wife, yeah? When you get married, the false assumption is to think you have a relationship. The moment you get married, you don't have a relationship at all. Nothing, right? Now you have to build this relationship from scratch. You know how much effort that takes, time that takes, right? You have to master that. That's something you have to perpetually get better at every single iteration of it. Okay, that happened, it worked, I messed up, I'm gonna do this again. That happened, it worked, it didn't work, yeah? But then other things in life, you don't have to be, like for example, in modern times, I always tell people, because they always ask me, what's a good thing to hack at? Everybody at some level should be able to hack at communication. It's important. It's so important. Communication is so important. Most people have difficult lives because they are not communicating properly. And if they start to communicate properly, if they just be assertive enough and kind enough and have power over their speech, which is what we're going to be talking about for Jumu'ah, right? So that's your topic, right? So if they have that, then what happens is that everything around them changes. Everyone around them changes. Why? Because they chose the right word. Instead of using this word, they use this word. That's all that happened. Instead of saying something, for example, most people who are nervous, they inflect their questioning. Sorry, they inflect their facts, right? At the end of it, right? So even if you ask people their names, so for example, so what's your name? My name is Hassan. See that inflection at the end in the tone, right? There's a 1/3 chance that the other person starts taking you more seriously because you inflected, versus my name is Hassan with a upwards inflection, right? It already garners respect just on an inflection. These things are studied across the board, by the way. And that's why there's a way that you carry yourself which allows others to evaluate you with a higher recognition than even the way you evaluate yourself. Based on what? Based on communication markers. So that's something that everyone needs to learn how to hack. But then other things you should dabble in. If you're not someone who's very ilmi, right? You don't need to have hacking and mastery in terms of knowledge. Just have a really good friend who's a nerd. That's it. No, I'm serious about this. Have a friend who's in all the majalis, they know the local ulama, they know that. Just ask this person. It's like, I'm confused about this. Can you quickly help me? And since he's your really good friend, they'll answer your call right away, hopefully. And they'll tell you, right? And then you can do other things for the ummah that are important to the ummah that they need and that educational guy is not going to be able to give, right? So you need to understand where your domain is. Does that answer your question? I hope. Yeah, it's just more of a ramble. Yes.
Suggestions for active communication.
That's Friday khutbah. Are you going to be here for Jummah? Okay, we'll do that in Jummah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so yeah, I can repeat the question. So the question is with regards to, we talked about memorization. So the sister is asking the method of doing reflection and tadabbur and tafsir of the Quran as a primary step, and then hifd of the Quran as a secondary step. Yeah, so, if you are in grade 4 and you want to memorize the Quran, would you suggest to a grade 4 kid, I think you should really go through the tafsir tradition well and memorize the Quran? No, but if someone is 24, right, or 16 or 18 and they want to memorize the Quran, then actually the afdal position is that you memorize what you've understood. This is afdal. Why? Because at that time, at that age, comprehension of the Quran takes priority over retention of the Quran. Okay, and unfortunately, in our culture, this is not the case, right? I know someone who was 72 years old and very bright, left her studies because she said, I spent 65 years ignoring Allah, so I'm going to now spend the rest of my retired life. She's a very wealthy lady, just worshiping Allah. I'm like, this is great. So she enrolled in a bunch of courses, and then like a couple months later, she said, I don't think I can continue because it's affecting my hifz. And in my head, I was like, okay, I don't understand you, lady. What do you mean it's affecting your hifz? Are you memorizing the Quran? She's like, yes, I'm on the 6th juz. I'm like, firstly, I want to borrow some of that himma. I don't know where you're getting that himma from. At 72, she's like, I will memorize the Quran. This is like someone saying who's like absolutely old, like, I am going to climb Mount Everest, right? But alhamdulillah, she memorized 6 juz in 6 months. She was memorizing a juz a month at 72 years of age. And she's not Arab, by the way. So I was like, all right, hats off to you. You want to take time off to do this? You are so intentioned, go ahead. I don't even have a problem. However, I did tell her that understanding the Quran takes priority over memorization. And we have actual ahadith from an athar of the Sahaba on this. For example, Ibn Umar taking the time that he took for Surah Al-Baqarah. Likewise, his father, Sayyidina Umar, right, supported 8 years, the other one 14 years to memorize Surah Al-Baqarah. What does this suggest? What this suggests is that they weren't just doing mere memorization. right? I think we need to change the culture around hifz, right? One of my students actually wrote a very important paper. When it's out, maybe we can share it with you guys, and then you can let others know. And it's the idea of where this hifz culture comes from, that people have to memorize the Quran, or the idea of memorizing the Quran without delving into ilm as a field. But the idea was, if you memorize the Quran, that was the Bismillah to your actual studies of knowledge. It wasn't the Ameen to your studies. It wasn't the finishing. It's the beginning of your studies. It wasn't the finishing of your studies, right? But that changed along the way, where hifz became the thing that you want. No, hifz is the first step into ilm. It's not the thing that you want to stay on. You want to transcend that. You have to understand. Now you have to start serving the Quran, right? And Taraweeh practices doesn't help either, because then people become Taraweeh Muslims. Like they're Hufadh of the Quran, 11 months, they're completely disconnected from everything. And then during Ramadan, they come out as if they were hibernating from 11 months, right? So this is also not very virtuous, this idea. So everyone should be in a hifz class, every Muslim, right? We should bring hifz back as a culture. It's like everyone should be a hafidh of the Quran, or wanting to be a hafidh. But what does that mean? What that means is that they're memorizing with intentionality, right? With some meaning. And even if it's very little, so what? It has no bearing, right? One of the great qurra of our time, Sheikh Ahmed Nuaina, we were with him in Houston, and he was talking to us about how he became a qari. Like this person really like world-renowned qari, number 1, 2, 3 on the list at that time. Yeah. And he said to us that I was as a medical doctor, pediatrician, and he said, I went to the masjid once and the imam was not there. So we had some like random person lead the salah, and I felt that this was beneath me. He's talking about his ego. He said, this guy's not, it's nobody. He said, there was nothing he did in life except he wasn't number 1 in. He's one of those guys. Except in salah. He's always behind someone. So he went to the imam, he said, I need to learn the Quran. And the imam said to him, it's like, okay, you have to come and study with the rest of the kids in the masjid. And he said, I can't do that. I am a pediatrician. I have this time. And they say, okay, you're going to do this. You're going to recite for just 10 minutes a day. That's it, 10 minutes. Within the next 3-4 years, he had finished memorizing the Quran, 10 minutes a day. And he had started studying the other qira'at and the different maqamat that they teach in Egypt. And eventually, in the next 6-7 years from that time, he became Sheikh Ahmed Nuaina. If you Google Ahmed Nuaina, you'd be shocked. He still, by the way, is a full-time pediatrician. He hasn't quit his job, but he travels the world and he teaches Quran and he recites Quran. But we forget that the openings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come through what? They come through sincerity and effort. So as long as you have that, then you have that. Everyone should have a hifz track. Everybody. You should have a hifz teacher. Everybody. I'm not just saying this, you guys. Like everyone, go get a hifz teacher and say, I only know 20 surahs. I know 6 surahs. I know 15 surahs. I know 23 surahs. I remember, I used to remember this. I've forgotten. Tell everything to this hifz teacher and say, I need you to make sure you hold my hand until I finish the memorization. That's it. Takes 15 years. So what? Takes 30 years. So what? Who's waiting? Is anyone on a timer here? Yes? No. If you die before that, you're raised as a hafidh of the Quran. Why don't you want that? Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Any other? Yeah, let me the brothers first on the side.
So you mentioned, the point for the principle, sort of 2 principles, for law or, and bad, for the rights of the people community.
Yeah.
And regarding that principle, in terms of, leisurely activities, and navigating around that, if say you were invited by a fellow brother for an event or something that perhaps might not be very befitting, how could you sort of navigate around that? Or say, for instance, if you felt very overwhelmed, perhaps you wanted more time to yourself, and so in with regards to as well, how to navigate.
Yeah, so two separate questions. The first question is an activity which is dubious. Find out if that dubiousness is haram or not. Not everything dubious is haram, right? A lot of them are, but not everything dubious is haram. Okay? And in that, look at your relationship. If your relationship is very close to this person, then advise them, tell them to change what they're doing, so that you can attend that particular event or that gathering. Is very easy. But if your relationship is of distant level, and so you can politely excuse yourself. Okay, but that again is that if you know that what's going on is not permissible. Okay, if it is permissible, but it's just not optimum. If it's permissible, but it's not optimum, like you consider it to be a waste of time, right? Like I recently invited someone for paintballing. And he messaged me saying, Ustadh, I can't, he's a sheikh too, by the way. He said, Ustadh, I can't do this because I vowed not to engage in activities that have no benefit. I read that, I called his teacher, and I said, can you call him and tell him to come to paintballing? And so in the next 2 minutes, the guy called me back and he says, did you speak to Sheikh? I said, yeah. He said, okay, why? I'm like, because you think paintballing is not productive, man. I'm going to shoot you up, right? Come to paintballing, you're running around, make the proper niyyah and come. What's wrong with you, right? So I think many of us, we are in our own heads, okay? So if you actually, I think we're more stricter than our teachers. If you actually go to a teacher and say, is this permissible? You'll be like, why are you even asking this stuff? Okay, so we have to find out the thing that we're going to is fine. For example, the one thing that would be absolutely impermissible, that is the very common thing that happens across the board. If, let's say your friend invites you to their wedding, okay, and it's a walima, and it's a mixed gathering in which there sometimes mixed, this is a mixed gathering, by the way, right? But this is not what how a walima is though, right? And there are people who are not dressed appropriately, and you don't feel comfortable, and you can't take your, for me, I have children. I can't take my kids, right? Because I can understand and my wife can understand and we can navigate through some of the complexities and things like that. But the children have to know what is haqq and what is batil. And how are they going to know haqq and batil if the parents are completely okay with batil in front of them? So in those cases, is it okay to excuse yourself? Yes, but with nasiha, not out of conflict. It's like, I'm not attending this because astaghfirullah, right? And that's your explanation. It's like, why not? Astaghfirullah. Because there's no explanation. Okay, do you say, look, I have children and I'm trying to educate them. And I understand you have a cultural baggage. I had the same cultural baggage, but I don't think we need to repeat the mistakes of the other community, like our older generation with this generation. So I'm intentionally doing this, but we'll come to the nikah at the masjid. We'll come to this event and that event. We'll come see you guys. We'll host this nice little dinner for you guys. This is not about animosity. What we do is the opposite, right? We say, like, this is it. Never attending this person's events anymore. Astaghfirullah. The guy's like, he didn't come to my walima. I'm not going to go to his kids, this thing and that thing. No, it's not about that, right? It's about saying to this person, I absolutely love you, right? I absolutely love you, but I have to do the right thing for my family, but I absolutely love you, and then to have that very mature discussion. And 90% of the time when you have that, you'd actually see that there's a big difference in the way that people are communicating with you, right? Yeah, we'll go one by one. Yes, go ahead. So sorry, just before you say that, that the whole point of leisureliness, by the way, we didn't even touch on that. Okay. But yeah, no, we didn't touch on this. But the one thing that I want to do highlight is that you guys, when you are calling your friends and you're hanging out, because that's the most relevant thing here for a lot of you guys, hanging out with friends, please, for the sake of sanity, okay, please try and be expansive in your invites. Okay, don't make this like a cool people club or like practicing people club, okay, or invite as vast as you can invite, unless there's financial restrictions, like you only have money for one pizza, you can't invite 20 people now. Okay, so if you have restrictions, it's a different issue. But if you don't have restrictions, please expand. The Prophet, what is his favorite meal? Hassan, don't answer. What is the favorite meal of the Prophet? Yes. Huh? Very good. In terms of dishes, yes. But in terms of meals, what is yes? Very good. The platter with the most hands in it. What is the most blessed walima for the Prophet? What did he tell us? What's the most blessed walima? Yes. Absolutely, where everyone's there. So part of our leisurely activities must be an inclusion of not just the people that are very close in the inner circle. You can do that from time to time. But generally speaking, have an open door policy. Anybody who wants to come and wants to partake in. You know what that does? It invites people who perhaps might not be very religiously inclined. It makes them feel welcomed and comfortable. Then you create that harmonious system that we're talking about with the pendulums, where the spiritually alpha hearts, they're able to transfer and imprint their frequency on the others around them. Okay, so that's number one. Number one, be vast in your casting net. Number two, the second, and very importantly, try and do things where there's actual engagement. You guys, if you watch something for 2 hours, are you engaging with someone? You could have just watched on your own and then talked about it. Right? You understand what I'm saying? Like do an activity where there's actual engagement. Right? I heard there was like this ski trip happening. Great. There's hikes that you guys are part of. Great. There's other things you're doing, which is an actual action. You're going on an adventure together. You're having a conversation. The couples ask me all the time when I'm doing the premarital course, what are good date events? And I'm like, you guys, this idea of going to a restaurant, sitting down and eating, it is so silly. Maybe if you're both 50, okay, that's fine. Yeah, but like you're like young people, you want to really get to know someone, put them in an uncomfortable position. I'm not making this up, right? I don't know, this is being recorded, so I have to be careful because my wife stumbles over this stuff. It's gonna be really. But one of the first things, my wife is a kickboxer, and so when we got married, right, my understanding of the date was like the Western. I grew up here, so it was like the Western understanding of what a date is, right? Like you go to this. And her understanding of a date was like an 8-kilometer uphill hike, right? And initially when we got married, I'm like, is this just her, or is this supposed to be normal, right? Then I had to like get gear. And like, oh, we're going on, okay, I have to get proper gear, right? So that's the second thing, which is do things that you actually are doing something together. And by the way, some of the best things you guys can do, especially with peers, people similar in age as you, is you learn something together, right? Like you travel together. I can't recommend this enough. Anybody who's done this, they know this as a fact. You really want to bond with someone, travel with them, right? Go on a trip with them. Seriously, especially if it's a ilmi trip, because then your discussions are based on knowledge. You're going to see a mutual sheikh or a scholar. You're there to introduce someone to somebody, right? You're going a long drive to something beautiful, like a scenic thing. Do these type of things. This is how you truly bond. This leisure, trust me, you guys, once you start doing this, you will never want to go on a movie with somebody. I guarantee you, do this a bunch of times, you'll consider going on a movie with someone to be a colossal waste of money and time. Because this person that you actually did something active with has completely changed the way you see the world. I remember one of my university friends, his parents used to live in Qatar, and he got laid off. So he didn't have a place to stay. So he just started living with us, and like in my family's home. And he was super addicted to social media, right? And I had to like somehow get him out of it. I was like, all right. So I made it a personal mission that since he's living here, I'm going to do every psychological experiment that is possibly there for addictions on social media. And I read the material on it to get this guy off of it, right? So you know what thing really worked? The thing that really, really worked was canoeing and golfing. He got addicted to both. And both things, alhamdulillah, are those things that if I'm busy, he could do on his own, right? And it just happened. It was like sometimes, and I used to tell my mom, because he didn't know we were experimenting on him, my mom and I, and so in some cases, in some times, he would forget his phone in the home and then be out with us. Right? And we all had our phones, and he was missing it. But all of it is to do that when you engage with people and you bond with people, you change something within them, which you will never get if you're doing passive engagement activities. Leisure is made more positive if you're doing something together, right? Now, this is not about is a movie permissible or not. That's not the issue, you guys. You can ask the fuqaha that. Okay, is watching a movie permissible? I don't know, what movie is it? Is it in the middle of a salah? Did you miss a salah because of it? right? There's like hundreds of questions you can ask for you to actually give that fatwa. But the thing that's important is that for you students who are in this room, remember, you're not out there. If you're in here, then you've already decided that you want to be optimal. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. It's not accidental that you're here. And the other thing is you didn't actually come here, you were brought here. Right? We have to understand these things, metaphysically speaking. Right? Why? Because the Prophet said, "Man yuridillahu bihi khayr yufaqihu fid din." If Allah has intended to do some good to you, He's going to give you an understanding of the religion. So if you find yourself in religious classes and things like religion, so if you find yourself in religious classes and things like that, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's awnul yad is with you. His helping hand is with you, which means you should not think of lower ways of being now. Because if Allah wants you to pursue mastery, then you should be like, oh, that was a great lecture. When's the next showtime? Yeah. No, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is already prompting you that you're not like everybody else. That's why you're in this room. Does that make sense? Okay, sorry, go ahead, sister. Did I make you forget your question? Okay, I tried. Yeah.
We're not making excuses in a way when it comes to like certain activities. Like we're saying this is rejuvenation, but are we actually trying to get rejuvenated, or maybe it's not the next activity?
Very good question.
And also not convincing ourselves or gaslighting ourselves like this is benefiting me when it actually is.
Yeah, so rationalizing something which perhaps is not a net positive, but you're just sprinkling over some intention over it. Okay, this is a good question. So the reality of it is that intention is a sirrum min asrarillah. Intention is mystery. Okay, intention is mystery. You can't, the thing I can tell you is that the ulama say that you shouldn't trust yourself. Okay, don't take excuses from yourself. The late Sheikh Muhammad al-Sharif, rahimahullah, when I asked him about a similar question, he told me, actually it was about the academy. So at that time I was launching an academy and I had shown him the curriculum and I was having second doubts about certain approaches and things like that. And so I went to him because he was visiting. He's originally from Ottawa, but he was visiting here at that time. This is before he had moved to the Middle East. And I asked him, Sheikh, I feel like it's missing something important. It's missing something important. And the third meeting we had, he was really annoyed with me, right? And he said to me that you are allowing yourself, you're fooling yourself on the guise of having pure intention. Because because you feel like your intention is not pure, you're not going to do the good thing. He said that is waswasa. You're being deluded. This is very important. So don't trust yourself. Don't trust yourself. Ask people. Go to people who have more knowledge, who are your mentors, and say, I have doubts about this particular thing. Am I in the right here? Am I overthinking this? Right? And then if you trust them, if they tell you to just don't worry about this and do this instead, that's fine. I'll give you an example. Recently, a sister who has committed a major sin, right? And we can all imagine if it's a young sister, which major sin she's committed. And she's going to Umrah now, right? As part of her tawbah. And alhamdulillah, she had sincere tawbah and all of these things. And she just, yesterday she called me, she's crying. And she said, I'm only going to Umrah to prove to myself that, I am somehow, I'm not like, so I don't feel guilty. But in reality, how do I know that my sincerity is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's probably just a feel-good thing, right? And I had to explain to her that, would you have gone to Umrah if you had not committed this sin? She's like, no. It's like, okay, take your win, right? Take your win. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is prompting you to tawbah, if you're a changed human being, and you are changed the people you hang around with, she changed her city. She moved from her city. She's changing everything about herself. I'm like, look, if that's what you're doing, don't doubt the Umrah. Out of all things that you're doing, that's why you're doubting this. This is absolute waswasa, right? So you have to keep in mind that intention is a mystery, but if your intention is stopping you from doing good, it's probably waswasa and not a niyyah salihah. It's not a niyyah salihah issue, so waswasa issue. Okay? Yeah. Sure. Yes, go ahead.
The knowledgeable, like, stroke, and then you also have, I find it interesting, especially with North Africa and with the colonization in North Africa. A lot of the Bulgarians were also the warriors.
Yeah.
The idea of, like, separating those two things, can we, like, is that in many ways harmful?
So just to repeat the question, we spoke previously about people inclining to ilm and then people inclining to service. And the sister's mentioning that many a times in Islamic history, these would not have been two separate things, right? In an ideal world, yes, this is exactly what we'd want. We'd want people who are, or bad in the nights, right? And they are knights in the day. That's what you would typically want, right? They're worshipers in the night, and they are knights in the day, as in there are warriors in the day, right? So typically what you want. However, this is not the case always based on people's proclivities and personalities. This is why it's very important to understand what your ikigai is. Do you guys know what an ikigai is? Yeah. It was just, everyone Google ikigai. I-K-I-G-A-I. Ikigai.
You're Japanese.
Yes. Get Wi-Fi, man. Come on. You seen the ikigai? Go to images, click on one of the circles. I-K-I-G-A-I. You see that? Yeah, just click on one of those circles.
Venn diagram?
Yeah, it's the 4 Venn diagrams, right? So here's what happens. When people don't understand this, they live a really miserable life, to be honest. Okay? The ikigai is your purpose. It's the thing that makes you wake up at night. There are 4 fundamental questions that you have to ask yourself before you pursue something. Like, do you love it? Does the world need it? Are you good at it? Can you be paid? Okay? So if all 4 of those things match, you found your calling. Your ikigai is your calling. You love something and you're good at it, the world needs it, and you get paid for it. Is there any better reality? No. 99.99% of the time, 2 of those things will match and not 3. Okay? Or 3 of those things will match, well, not 4. Right? So someone loves to do a particular thing, but nobody cares. Like, no one needs this skill. They have this rare skill, nobody needs it. You think they're going to get paid for it? No one needs this. Okay? Nobody needs this. On the other hand, you are so good at something, you love something so much, but you're not good at it. You love it. You're not good at it. Are you going to get paid? No, you'll be a horrible job at it, right? So it's very rare that all of those things come together, but this is how you can find hobbies. This is how you can find your vision. Because do you have to be good at your hobby? Not necessarily. It must be something you love, something you like engaging in. That's a hobby. Shouldn't make your hobbies into a profession. Shouldn't make your profession into your occupation. You shouldn't have all of this conflict with your mission. So in certain circumstances, there are some people whose mission is something else and their occupation is something else, right? Whose occupation is something else and their hobby is something else. And all of this is fine because our life circumstances differ, right? The amount of wealth we have differs. The amount of education we can potentially put ourselves through differs, right? What we inherit from our family differs. The amount of opportunities we had growing up differs, okay? The region we live in differs. You know, Abu Zahra, in his book on what makes a great faqih, he's talking about the 4 fuqaha. In the end, he's saying Abu Hanifa could not have been Abu Hanifa except he was regionally in Kufa. And Malik wouldn't have been Malik if he was regionally not in Medina, right? Which has nothing to do with Malik, by the way. It's just to do with like Qadr. The fact that he was in Medina and he got access to all those teachers in that climate has nothing to do with Malik. If Malik was as brilliant as Malik was, but he was in another country, another region, you wouldn't have Maliki madhab. You wouldn't have Malik, right? So a lot of the things line up and then your calling comes in, right? So many of those places in the past had a lot of social turmoil. One of my favorite scholars, Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, was a warrior. He dies a shaheed in Granada in one of the battles at the fall of Spain, Muslim Spain, right? However, there's a lot of other ulama, they had no fighting bone in their body. You actually see this with the Sahaba, right? Some of the Sahaba are known for fiqh, right? Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Ibn Umar, right? Aisha, Ibn Mas'ud, Ali, they're known for fiqh. Other Sahaba are not known for fiqh. They don't actually give fatwas. They say, go to this other Sahabi. They're not going to, this is a Sahabi, but they're not known for fiqh, right? The other times, Hassan ibn Thabit is someone who gives a service no one else can give, right? His pen, his qalam, his poetry in the defense of the Muslim, the honor of the Muslim women, in the defense of the Prophet, to the point where the hadith in Bukhari, where the Prophet said, Ya Hassan, qum, stand up and recite. وَأَيَّدَكُمْ بِرُوحِ الْقُدُسِ, right? That Jibreel is helping you. This is what the Prophet said to him. That same Hassan ibn Thabit at the Battle of Tabuk sought permission to not fight. Sorry? And at Khandaq was in the Hujurat with the women because he refused to fight. This is the same Hassan ibn Thabit. What is anyone going to say that, oh my God, astaghfirullah, Hassan ibn Thabit, what a coward? Anyone has the guts to say this? No, but his proclivity, his service in a different stream. So we're all have different, this is why masculinity is such an important thing. What does masculinity mean? According to the Arabs, the Prophet was not being masculine when he would kiss his children. But do you know of someone who's more masculine than the Prophet? Does anyone here know someone who's more masculine than the Prophet? So what does the Prophet do? He's redefining masculinity, right? Therefore, the Sahaba also become the archetypes for certain things. Some Sahaba excelled in this thing, others excelled in that thing, others excelled in that thing. And so perhaps the Prophet was a unison of perfection. But the Sahaba themselves, we don't call them perfect, but in the things that they went really, really far, those things for us to go far in is virtuous. They become like the nujum. I know the hadith has weakness, but the Prophet said, Ashabi kal nujum. My companions are like stars. You choose any one of them and you'll be guided. Right? So were they all the same? No, they had proclivities. And my point was, you feed your proclivity. You feed your proclivity. Yeah? Yeah. Okay, no. I thought you guys would have like more like Fiqh of Leisure questions. Which I'm glad you don't have it, because then I don't have to purge myself. Yes.
So yeah, I was gonna ask. You mentioned when you started the fiqh, you mentioned the one, right? Like the hukum of lahu, you differed. Can you give us maybe before we end like one or two more?
Yeah. So classical fuqaha talked about chess in this light, right? There's also a famous hadith on dice games, right? Famous hadith on dice, that anything involving dice. There's a la'na, one hadith says la'na Allah, one hadith actually chastises this. Scholarly tradition looks at there's two ways of looking at it, two ways of looking at a text of the Quran or the hadith. One of them is to look at the text of it and ignore everything else, just looking at solitary narration. The other way to look at it is not to look at that solitary narration, the khabar wahid, but to also look at that in light of everything else specifically from the Quran as the qawaid and principles, and then from the sunnah of the Prophet, and look at, is the Sharia's intention to say dice is a problem, or there's something else? And when we find out, if you look at the commentaries, for example, Ibn Hajar comments on this, it becomes very clear, the issue is not with the dice. The issue is that the only dice games used at the time were for the alzam, and they were for the gambling. And so the hukum is given as for gambling, but the word that is coming in is the tool for gambling. What is the tool for gambling? At that time would have been dice. So today, if someone wants to play some dice game for children, but doesn't involve any gambling, right? This would not be considered haram according to the fuqaha of the madhab, okay? Of the earlier madhab, which would be the Hanafis and the Malikis. Yes?
This is off topic, like on the major topic and all of this one. When we're reading books, not in regards to Islam, but like let's say Western books and whatnot, how do we like give it in a sense to make it worth our time and not one of like leisure?
Well, hopefully the book is worth it. If you're leading some bakwas stuff, then depends what the book is.
Let's say if it's like if I give my own current example, if it's Ilya,
Yeah.
And for me, how do I give the niyyah that it's meant for actually for like good and
So 3 principles on reading non-Islamic material. Okay. Number 1 principle: if it is influencing you and you're not grounded in Islam, and it's influencing you, meaning it's giving you ideations. If you're getting ideologies from it and you're not grounded in Islam, you shouldn't be reading it. I know some people don't like this, you guys. I don't actually care if you like this or not. I've just dealt with this so many times. I'm telling you, if you are not grounded in Islamic science and reading really powerful people with powerful ideas, you are going to be affected by those ideas, whether you like it or not. So if you don't have people who are really grounded in Islam that you're conversing about these books with, you shouldn't be reading it. So that's number 1. No problem with ilm, but ilm, purposeful ilm, right? Number 1. Number 2, when you're reading this text, are you doing like a syntopical read? Are you doing an elementary read? Are you doing an analytical read? Or are you doing a syntopical read? They all differ. So elementary reading is you're reading just for the sake of getting the reading through. Analytical reading is you're reading to analyze, to understand. Inspectional reading is you're reading to get it to understand maybe some 2-3 things on it and not the whole thing. And syntopical reading is everything that you're reading, every idea, you're comparing it with something that you already know. For this, it would be your Islam, your Quranic principles, your virtue ethics. So you can read now the Iliad, but you read it in the context of you're reading as a Muslim. Okay? And then finally, the third thing is that be very careful about one thing when you're reading these things, is that when you're reading, especially something like mythology or philosophy, these type of things, that to understand that you don't read it from an inferiority complex view, which is what you're reading, you know that the haqq is on your side. The haqq is in the Quran and the Hadith. You might not know it yet, but you know that. And so everything this person is saying, even if it's a piece of wisdom, you're going to now not look at it as is the harf al-akhir. This is not the final statement on this issue. Okay? What happens in many cases, because these books have been aggrandized in front, like this is a great book, it's a classic, right? We read it as if we read, scripture. This is not the case. You should know its maqam, right? So for example, if you read a Christian writer who talks about the power of loving Jesus, some of the most powerful material you'll ever read, I can vouch for this, is that genre of reading. I'm not making this up. And there is a reference for this in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the Quran, He says that Allah, right? وَجَعَلْنَا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ رَحْمَةً وَرَأْفَةً وَرَحْمَةً. That Allah says, we put into their hearts a type of compassion and kindliness and love. So this is Allah saying the Christian tradition produces soft-hearted people. So when those people out of love of Christ write something, it's really powerful stuff. But reading that, you should know that this is an inferior thing because it's talking about it from the lens which is not accurate. It's considering Christ to be God, right? Why do I say this is because oftentimes we are influenced because of the hype of a particular book. We think that this is like sacred literature. There's no such thing as sacred literature except as wahy. The wahyain requires ta'zim. Everything other than the wahyain does not require ta'zim. It requires a critical lens. You don't read the Iliad thinking the Iliad is right. You read the Iliad to criticize the Iliad because it's not the Quran. Which doesn't mean you can't take wisdom from it, but it doesn't mean you give in perfection to it. Right? So don't be so awestruck and dazzled eyes as you think this cannot make mistakes. It's the same thing with human beings. Anybody who thinks that any human being after the Prophet ﷺ is free from criticism is dazzled-eyed. This is not true. No Sahabi thought the other Sahabi was perfect. So how dare we think that such and such imam, such and such scholar, such and sheikh cannot make a mistake? This is idiocy. It's illogical. It's not part of our parcel. What we do is that we make this one sheikh or one alim, we make them a demi-prophet. Because we think he's ma'soom in his judgments, in his fatwas, in his fiqh. Very simply put, the students of a lot of the great ulama, like Abu Yusuf, in terms of Abu Hanifa, Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani, Abu Yusuf, Zufar, Itriki, Abu Nu'aym, all of these people differ from Abu Hanifa. If they thought he was perfect, they would not do so. The Sahaba differed from each other. If they thought that Ibn Umar can never get anything wrong, Sayyidina Aisha would have never countered him. They don't think each other is perfect. Yes? So we don't do that. If we can't do that with Ibn Umar, do you think we're going to do that with Homer? Right? That's the problem. So as long as you have that right, that's why every time we do a book in the book club, which is written by a Muslim scholar or written by a non-Muslim scholar, there's always a section on critique. What are their contemporaries? How do their contemporaries critique them? Right? What are the flaws? You never read things with dazzled eyes. That's only for the Quran. It's only for authentic hadith that we say the one person we can trust, even if it doesn't make sense to us, is Muhammad bin Abdullah. Besides that, everyone is up for question. Right? With respect, everyone's up for question. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Second principle for reading, sorry? Okay.
Like the principle of them, like the principle of being.
Oh, we only talked about two principles. Yes. So the first principle was that ad-dunya mal'una, right? And the second principle was that when it comes to ahkam, we take the more cautious approach for ourselves and the more tolerant approach for everybody else. Make excuses for other people, right? Yes.
So I think a common question that comes up, and I guess this will be helpful going forward, when people have actual questions about certain masail around leisure,
Yeah.
what's your advice to them in seeking out the answer that they
I
actually-
think there's only three major issues. In my perspective, there's only three major issues. One issue is there's a text of hadith that says something is impermissible but is widespread today, right? So there creates confusion, like the dice issue, like the hadith and the fatwa of the Sahaba on shatranj, which is chess, like the issue of music, right? Very, very strong narrations, explicit, but then the cultural reality is that this is min al-umur al-balwa, like from our times, like it's everywhere, right? So that's one. The second is gender interactions. Gender interactions. People with leisure, in leisurely settings, because in formal settings, never an issue. This is a formal setting. This is never an issue. In masjid, it's never an issue. But in leisure activities, this becomes an issue because there's some form of ikhtilat, right? There's some form of mixture between men and women, and so people want to have highlighted that. So that's number two. And number three is those things that people can't easily decipher a right niyyah for. So they're not haram things, but they're like neutral things, and people are having a difficult time to get the right niyyah for it, right? So for example, someone's addicted to video games. It's like, how do I make sure that I make a ta'abudi niyyah when I play 3 hours of video games a day, right? So there's like, this is a leisurely question. Like, what do I do, right? It's like, what do you play? Call of Duty. I said, describe it. You got to shoot up people. I said, okay, so let me rephrase this. Your question is that you virtually shoot up people for 3 hours and you want to know how you can turn that into worship. All right. It's like, yes. Right? So those are the three categories of questions. I have never found a fourth category. You can put any leisurely question into those three buckets. Okay, so what you need is you need principles for each. And if you have that, you can answer your own questions. And the rule is istafti qalbak, right? Take fatwa from your own heart. Be sincere, take fatwa from your own heart. When it comes to the opposite gender, there's only two principles. Number one, you're never alone with them, right? So there's never khalwa, number one. And number two, there's never a form which appears, not even if it is, if it appears flirtatious. So anytime there's any form of shahwa, you disconnect. Like you're catching feelings, they're not feelings, they're cooties, right? So you disconnect, okay? Any form of shahwa, you disconnect. Any form of inclination, desire, right? Drive towards this person is a problem, right? You know the late, the Ustadh that just passed away from our community, what's his name? Allah Akbar. Yes.
The principle, I forget.
Yeah. What's his name?
I don't know.
No. Yeah. Ustadh Umar. He once told me that the only one thing that people need to know with the gender interactions. I was with Zayan in UK the other day, and he told me that this is what you guys follow here, right? Which is the PPL policy, right? Yeah, that's from that. By the way, that's from Ustadh Umar Zia. He invented that. You should give him that. That's it. Your interactions with opposite gender, as long as you have that problem is solved. Okay, then the first issue. So there are three issues, right? For leisure. What was number one? So for that, you need ilm. You have to sit with teachers. You can't do that yourself because you have to read commentaries. Because commentaries would tell you what is actually being spoken about, right? For example, just for your example, if there are explicit positions on musiqi in the past, you should educate yourself into knowing that there are later positions within the schools that differ. You should know this. You should know that it's not a monolith, right? You could take remember what I told you, take the ihtiyat position for yourself, the difficult position on yourself, and take the tolerant position on other people. The great ulama from all madhabs that argued for and against music. There's not something to shy about. It's a nuanced discussion. You need to sit down with teachers and just do a deep dive. Last Ramadan, not this one, last Ramadan, one of my students forced me to do this. So I spent 12 days researching with him. And then we did a 3.5-hour lecture on we traced music from like 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, all the major fatwas within madhab, outside madhabs, right? Then the tafsir tradition on those verses. There are 6 verses in the Quran, for example, that are often used to say that this music is impermissible. That how the different mufassirun looked at all those verses, all that stuff. So it is a discussion. So in category 1, you are not the judge of it. You have to do a deep dive. You have to, and if you're engaging in yourself in some activity where the hadith seems to say it's a no, but your community is saying it's completely fine, do the deep dive. Okay? Number 2, for ikhtilat of the dhakar and the untha, like the mixing of the genders, then you should know your principles, which is never alone, which by the way also means in a group chat. Also means in a group chat. Okay? You know how difficult that is for me? Because what is it? I think 65% of my students are women. Do you guys know how weird that is? That I can't talk to women on the group chat. Which means they have like there's 3 people in the group. Right. You have that, yeah, you have to do this. Okay, this is mandatory for you to do. Mandatory. It's the same hukum, right? I'm not talking about like a one-off, someone asked you a question, you answer. I'm like saying someone you're engaging in a conversation with back and forth. Okay? And then the other thing is your protocol. So, when shahwa exists, you pull the plug and follow PPL and it's fine, right? What is PPL? Public, purposeful, limited. Yes. And what was the last, sorry, let me just finish this. What was the last of the 3 things? Type of questions that you get for leisure? Difficult time getting an intention. If you can't find a good intention for something, you should not do it. If you can't find a positive intention, for example, you guys, be logical. Is there a positive intention for any form of social media engagement where you are following someone of the opposite gender?
Very rarely.
Outside of ilm.
Okay. Not really.
Outside of ilm. Forget knowledge and this stuff. What about cooking shows? You know what happens? So I know someone who knows for Instagram, his best friend was on the software development team for the algorithms, right? You know what he told me? He told me that the program is designed to ensure that the user's gender is exposed to at least 60 to 80% of content which is from the opposite gender.
For Instagram.
Yeah, so my wife and I did this as an exercise, right? No, it wasn't her. I did this with a friend of mine, which is we're both sitting, it was a long flight, and before we took off, so it would have been what, a 3.5-hour long flight, just 3.5 hours. Before we took off from Pearson, he said, I'm gonna follow all these male fitness guys, right? And he's gonna follow all these male fitness chefs. Sorry, not fitness chefs, but like chefs, just generally chefs. So we did this, okay? 3.5 hours later, it's marinating, it's cooking, the algorithm's doing its thing, okay? We land in Atlanta, and we're waiting to get picked up to go to the conference, right? So we land in Atlanta and we look at our phones and wallahi, on my phone, right? I just signed up to like 7, 8, like the top male fitness guys, right? It's all women on like my timeline thing, fitness stuff. And on his, it's all female chefs. See what the, so I was trying to tell him that that's what the algorithm, because I wanted him off Instagram. So it's like, this is what the algorithm is doing. So we did this social experiment. It's true. You can try it. I mean, don't try it. But you know what I mean? So knowing this, then you know that you're being programmed, right? Once you know that you're being programmed, you know that you're being played with, you should unplug. Yes.
We'll do one more question so we have to
Yes.
close.
Alaikum salam. Yes. What are you talking about closing? More people are entering the majlis. All right. Isn't that the case?
Unless you're fine. Like,
I don't have a,
other than we-
no, I don't have a curfew. Yeah.
From the team, I'm retired. The guys.
Yes. Are we good?
One more.
We
One
did-
more.
last question? Okay, last question. Go ahead.
Does it matter what gender?
Can I quickly say something if I have ijaza? Like, do I have your permission to say something before a question quickly? Yes? Okay, you guys. So I have a student who's in grade 12. Okay, he goes to St. Marcy's, a school in Mississauga. He just told me, he came to my house to discuss this issue. He says, we have a group project and I have two sisters in the class, three sisters in my group, and it's me. And two of them are Muslims, and one of them is a Muhajjiba sister, and the other is a non-Muslim sister. So three sisters and him, they're in the same group. So we created a WhatsApp group, and she asked me to leave the WhatsApp group because she was like, I can't be in a group with a boy. And I said to her, but there's other people in the group. She says, no, my boyfriend told me I can't be. She said, my boyfriend told me I can't be in a group with another boy. And he's like, so I don't know if she's religious or he's not really that. I'm so confused because she's wearing the hijab, but she has a very over domineering boyfriend. And is this khalwa? Like, I'm so confused. Anyway, sorry, just because you mentioned the whole group chat thing. Yeah, the gender of the other person does not matter. Yeah, you just don't want the third person to be the shaitan. Okay, because if there are two, the third is the devil. That's why. Yeah, rapid fire. Yes. Yeah, so take fast, just like you fast from food, you fast from social media. Okay, like if you do intermittent fast, usually in Ramadan, you do a complete knockoff. Okay, no access. Social media means that you are there for social reasons. No, there should be no such thing as social media. As in, if you want to connect with human beings, you connect with actual human beings. You don't don't DM anybody, don't like DM someone and say, we need to meet up, right? DM someone and say, we need to talk. Not have conversations over that. That's not natural. We're not designed to do that. When you are going to be using social media, then make sure that everyone you're following who's not a net positive on your feed, you're not following them. So the only people you're following are people who add value to your life. Okay, if there is a particular person that you think is like having them on social media is not bringing you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remove them. If there's someone who is vile, they don't dress appropriately, they post things that are not appropriate, they share things not appropriate, remove them. Part of productive media is that if everything good that you see, if you're not learning, memorizing, acting, then you shouldn't move on. So if you found something and it was good and you stored it, it's not enough that you saved it or you've bookmarked it or you sent it to someone or you shared it. No, you better act on that. If you haven't, then you're just collecting evidences against you on the day of judgment. Because you knew this, you didn't act on any of this stuff. As long as you can do all this stuff, there's 17, I'll give you 6. As long as you can do all of these things, then it's fine to have social media. Because it's not social media for you, it's productive media. No problem.
For the wedding situation that you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
you said that you can politely decline. What if it's a member of your close family?
Then you can decline.
Then what do
You
do?
can't decline, you distance yourself. So as soon as the stuff happens, you leave the hall, you stay outside. But you can't decline. There's no, silatul rahim is it's afdal to making a stance on something which is haram. You see, connecting womb ties is a greater obligation than calling out nahi anil munkar, than doing nahi anil munkar. Does that make sense to everyone? So if your sibling is having this thing and you're connected, you go to their weird thing, right? And you're really awkward around it and you're like distant and like, yeah, I've had this. before before my son was born, it was just me and my daughter. We were at this event and we couldn't be there because of various reasons. So we spent literally, we made up games on the garden outside. But we showed up. We were there the whole time. I took food, then I brought food for her outside. We did the whole thing. We attended, right? But we didn't really attend. So you have to find a way out.
I have a follow-up question because I was.
Rapid fire.
Sorry.
They're never going to call me again here. And
Sorry.
you're the reason.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't ask the whole time. I was waiting.
Okay.
But that's if your non-mahram female relatives try touching you, like you're not going out of your way to touch them, but they touch you, what do?
You have to have a common discussion with them. Actually, your parents should have done that as soon as people became of age.
Or like,
But in a
based on
cultural,
culture.
in a cultural milieu, when that doesn't happen, since you're an adult and the other person, like your cousin, is also an adult, you need to have a very frank conversation about how much you love and respect them, but how much this is a shari boundary that you cannot cross, right? Especially if you grew up together, this is going to be the norm. You have to have an alternative narrative. But communication, right? Which is what we were talking about, which is the khutbah this Friday. Rapid fire.
So this is.
This is it's not rapid fire, man. Rapid fire.
So if you have a group of friends, you're planning a vote, and you cannot reach.
This is the last question.
In this case, could you choose by random chance or, draw lots or, like randomly?
What are you planning?
No, I'm saying like you have number of ideas on what to do with the group.
Okay, I understand your question.
Everyone's undecided.
Okay,
But you have to,
pick an amir. Everything should have an amir. Okay, the amir decides. Don't cast lots, even though it is not haram to do that. Okay, but don't cast lots. Have an amir. This is what the Prophet would do, right? He would always appoint an amir. The amir decides, and then you just the amir is appointed because they'll keep everyone happy. To give them the responsibility. It's easy. Everything, even a small trip, like you're going from here to somewhere else, get an amir. Saves you from all these things. Okay. Yeah. If the organizer says it, no problem. Okay. So if they're elderly, there's a lot of room here. Okay. And I asked, actually, this is the question I asked a bunch of my teachers. And they said, if they're elderly, it's culturally the assumption that this is not something that is vulgar or lewd or shameless. And they are elderly to you to a degree where, they are significantly an elderly person, then in this case, mild affection. Whereas for the example I asked him for is that, I have someone in my family, in my relatives, and out of love, they've been doing it since I was a kid. They kiss me on my forehead every time we meet them. So what happens in the case? And the Sheikh literally said, like, urf is going to take precedence over here. In your community, the hukum of this. And by the way, all of my teachers said the exact same thing. This is why I say some of our opinions are stricter than our teachers. All right, our teachers don't find any problem with this stuff. They said it's completely fine. There's no shahwa involved. They're elderly. They raised you. They did this. None of this is a problem. That's why I said your urf will decide this. Like you will decide this. Okay? Yeah, I'm not going to decide that for you. Yes, and then yes. Yeah, go ahead. Intention is a mystery. You don't know what your intention. What's your intention for being here today? You're in this gathering. What's the salient intention? So if you were in, where are you from? If you're in Pakistan today, would you be here to gain knowledge? No, you would not fly here for Fiqh of Leisure. Okay. So what I'm saying is that your intention is a mystery because even in the things you're doing, you don't know. It's always a battle. You're always trying to purify your intention. You don't know why you're here. It could be for your nafsi reasons, right? It could be so that you have brotherhood. It could be for ilm. It could be because you had a sincere question and you're waiting all this time to ask that question. It could be so many reasons. So because it's a mystery, you always are in a battle to purify your intention. Okay? That's what we meant. Yes.
If I want to get a social activity started, how do I get people to meet me halfway? Like, how do I get people to actually agree?
Yeah, make it as organic as possible. So you spend a lot of time with people, and when you do that, organically things are going to ensue. Okay, forcing activities upon people seldom works. You'll see that you lose number of people as the activities progress. Okay, but when it happens organically, when there's actual unsiya within the hearts, like I have unsiya with Ihsan. Ihsan says, I'm in the city, let's have dinner. I'll be like, yeah, let's have dinner. Why? Not because I'm hungry. It's because there's unsiya. So he's there, he's in the city, he wants to meet up, I want to meet up. That's fine. So develop unsiya, and other things are not that relevant. They just happen organically.
That is, how do you find something to do with someone who has a different interest than you?
It's okay, because you don't have to have the same interest. This is like the compatibility question. Two people, should they get married if they're not compatible? It has nothing to do with that, right? So, like, for example, someone's into sports, someone is not into sports. Oh, I can't marry her because she's not into sports. Who cares about whether she's into sports or not? The thing is, does she respect the things you're into? And are you into things that are praiseworthy? And do you respect the things she's into? And is she into things that are praiseworthy? Are you going to be her cheerleader and she's going to be your cheerleader in khair? And if that's the case, support is way more important than interest matching. So what do you do things with people? You give them an adventure. You give them something they don't know. This is what I said before. When you learn something together, it bonds you. Is it possible that you're really good at something, the other person is not, but you're bonding over that activity? Absolutely. Okay, this is very common. It's a good thing.
We'll conclude there.
Okay, last thing. Okay, can I get everyone to pay attention for just last 30 seconds? Okay, so having these discussions, having these conversations, the one thing that we should always keep in mind is that what you're doing today is you're taking an intentional step of learning to get to the maqasid of the Sharia, to get to what the aim of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in His law. This is what is maqsood. That is what is sought. This is what you need to do anytime you have to think about doing something. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pleased with it or not? 99% of your questions, you already know the answer to. You already know it. You just ask because someone might give you that 1% that you're hoping for. Okay? And let's not make religion that. You already know if it's permissible, not permissible, or what level of permissibility does this thing have, right? If you're on the master's path, you're going to diminish your wastage of time. And therefore, you do those things that are leisurely, that maximize your benefit. Spending time with your family, putting smiles on people's faces, okay, serving your community. These are all leisurely activities. This is not work or tasks. Okay, focusing on productivity, fixing your body up, fixing your mind, decluttering your house, minimalism, getting rid of things. This is all part of leisure if you want it to be. Okay, and spending time with righteous people. Even then, you do something which is neutral, the righteousness of those people will make it better. Even if it's just going out and having a bite. So surround yourself with righteous people, and 99% of the time, you don't have to worry about leisurely, haram, halal stuff. The righteous people won't let you be there. Okay, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Anything good that I have said, it's from Allah. There are mistakes in my speech is because of my own infractions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan. Just a couple of announcements. Firstly, everyone please keep Ustadh and his family and his teachers and his students in your du'as. He sacrifices a lot of time to be here. Funny enough, we have him again on Friday for brothers and sisters to run an Imam training workshop. It's open for sisters as well. He's going to run through a lot of important things about leadership and how to be an Imam and a lot of the rules and adab around that. It's on Friday after Jumu'ah. And then on Monday, he's back with the Dawah team on Miracles of the Quran Part 2. So everyone's encouraged to come to those if you can. And tomorrow, we have another amazing event on the Fiqh of Finance, an introductory session on the Fiqh of Finance by another Sheikh. Everyone's welcome to please try to make the most of these. Again, please keep him in your du'as and thank him as best as you can. Rasulullah said, "Man la yashkuri nas la yashkurillah." The one who isn't grateful to the people hasn't shown gratefulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So please keep in your du'as. And everyone, please get your MIMC tickets. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We apologize for